Lovely. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you managed to get some lunch and find your way over to our wonderful Enterprise Centre building. So we're going to kick off the main afternoon sessions now with our presentations and our keynote. And it's my pleasure to welcome you. I'm thrilled that we have Ian Woolner here, educational specialist at Microsoft, and he's going to be delivering our keynote for 2022. Like I'm sure many of you have here at UEA, we've relied upon Microsoft Teams to get us through the pandemic, and Ian is going to talk to us about how we progress that and continue that innovation and everything that we've done over the last 2 years and continue driving that forward. So let's give a big LTSMG welcome to Ian from Microsoft.
Cheers, Matt. Thank you. Thanks. Come and do a session, they said. You can have the one after lunch, they said. Have a nice rest. But no, look, seriously, thank you for inviting me today. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. UEA holds fond memories. I've seen AC/DC, Iron Maiden, Motorhead, Status Quo, ZZ Top here over the years when I had long blonde hair. I know, you're thinking, that's different. But lots of fun. Let's get started. My mum always said, if you didn't want people to remember who you are, put your name in the smallest font you can. So that's what I've done. I feel very privileged to work for Microsoft in the job that I do. I work in the education team. I'm also an advisor into the US product groups about what we need to be doing around technology. And that feedback comes from you, by the way. So it's all of the people across the sector that tell us what we need to be doing. We've got a packed agenda. Okay, let's go. I've been editing this morning because listening to some of the conversations that have been going on, I wanted to do a bit of an update about where we've got to, where we're going, and some of the things that we're talking about really at a customer level. So, you know, we're all seeing these strategy slides where we start to talk about what's happening in the sector. And we talk about this thing called the Education Transformation Framework. It's really centred around some of the challenges and the things that we see across the sector. So I'm going to rattle through it because the bit that I really want to start to focus on is some of the trends that we've seen around teaching and learning. Every day I get to hear about some amazing stories of where Teams has been used for teaching and learning, whether it's been used for personal development and professional development, even academic research. And one of the things that I'd ask you not to tweet or share on social media is the absolute number that we increased from and to around Teams. In fact, I'll probably pause because it's being recorded, but the number is phenomenal. The growth that we saw was absolutely unprecedented, and we had the unenviable position of being on Down Detector a few more times than we wanted to, as did other vendors. But that was because we'd had this flip situation of teaching and learning going online, and the internet was absolutely soaked, as we know. It was absolutely rammed. But moving forward, what we're starting to see is very much of a focus on well-being and experience. And so what we're starting to see is that Teams as a platform has settled in, but there is huge focus on analytics. So how are people feeling? How are they engaging with the platform? When are they engaging with the platform? What type of communication are they having? One of the things that we were expecting to see was a huge tail off as we started to move back on campus. But around Teams usage, we're not seeing that. What we are seeing is a real shift. So from it being a communications and a collaboration platform, we're still seeing lots of chat. We're still seeing lots of interaction with documents. And again, through some of the integrations with VLEs, we're starting to see this automation kick in. So if we look at the entire suite, what we tried to do over a period of time is really bake down what product fits where, what does what, because there is a bit of overlap in the entire Office suite, and we have Teams as this top-level UI and UX, and then underneath that, a load of functionality which really pulls through things like content creation, assignments, feedback loops, all of those different things that are required. And so I've spent the last 2 years with people like Alan Crawford, Claire Riley, all of the people in the Microsoft team, running these scale events to help academics and staff and students get up to speed with where the functionality fits and what it does. We don't see it slowing down. There's a shift, but the shift is coming to much more of the immersive type of experience. One of the things that I didn't put on the slide is that I'm also the accessibility lead for education in the UK. I'm not heavily dyslexic, but I'm mildly dyslexic. And I find tools like Immersive Reader in Edge and the applications in the Office documents bring a richness to how I read. I get the whirly wheel of words on paper. I have trouble with numbers, they get mixed up, which is not good in a revenue-bearing job, I can tell you. But it's quite interesting to see how those immersive tools are really starting to come to their fore as part of the Office suite. And it's that experience which we don't want to go away. I work with a great lady called Sarah Prince, who found it very difficult to interact with customers because of face masks. And so things like the transcription and the translation tools have really made her life much easier. And I get that same feedback from students and lecturers and tutors on a daily basis. So where are we going? What I'm seeing is much more of a focus around these key areas. So we want to ensure that people are making the most of the 365 suite and that they're getting the best value from it. We would love to see students making the most of it on their own devices, which they're really licensed and entitled to do. But the areas of focus for us are really down the bottom and up this side. So integrating the applications into Teams, which really help with that single experience. Moving across down to this corner, I feel like a weather person now. Moving down to this corner, the additional products in the Microsoft suite like LinkedIn, which fosters skills development as well. But the most important area for us is the box at the top, the one around VLE and LMS integrations. There's a lot of work going on with the LTI standard to really bring those integrations into Teams and Teams into those integrations. It's fair to say that when we launched Teams, we had this mantra of Teams being the single UI and UX. Over time, we've learned that that's not going to be the case. We have to have this equitable relationship with the VLE at all levels, and that's really where the investments are going. But it isn't all about Teams. You know, there's other platforms out there as well. There's Zoom, there's WebEx, there's others, the different VLE. So it's all about how we drive that integration. That integration. The bit that you guys have done an amazing job of is the learning spaces and the technology that goes in them. Listening to you all last night as you were throwing axes was quite interesting around some of the experiences that you've had. And I changed the title of this slide. I actually termed it, "You Know This Way Better Than Me," which you do. But at a top level, what I'm starting to see is a real shift in the size of spaces. One of my areas of passions as I meet with leadership teams and advisory boards is that we have amazing buildings like this repeated throughout the UK and many of the universities. So how do we drive that equitable investment in hardware and the experience that sits within it? One of the things I would say is that, you know, if I was a lecturer here and there was a student in the middle row and I had to pass a hand mic to ask a question so that people remotely can listen into that, you've got 15 seconds of fear building up in that student as they're just about to receive the microphone. That level of nervousness that can really impact the experience for them. So how do we start to drive audio so that it really gives that speak now, be absorbed, have that immersive type of experience? And again, we've seen some great examples of people mounting iPhones on tripods and then bringing in things like plain simple whiteboards into their lecturer experience. So a brilliant mix of things that are happening. This is just a really simple picture from a university in the US that deployed Teams very quickly and the Teams meeting room platform. And you can see there was no finesse about the cables. It was nice. It was get the job done, get the experience right, and we can tidy that up afterwards. And we saw this all over the place with the way technology was rolled out so quickly. Some of the statistics that I've heard, one of the universities in the southwest rolled out 17,000 Teams users in 7 days. I know that others were rolling out 30,000 in 11 days. So the speed at which you were underpinning those type of deployments was absolutely incredible. I have a personal ask. Meeting rooms. Microsoft Teams Room platform. One for the techies, the bandwidth that is allocated to a Teams video call is incredibly small. That's going to do 3 things. It's going to impact transcription, it's going to impact audio, and it's going to impact video. One of the things that I work with IT teams to do is correct that bandwidth and make sure that it's big enough to do the job it's there to do. I did a piece of work with one of the national societies around transcription, and we proved that increasing the bandwidth monumentally, not just a little bit, but monumentally increases the accuracy of the transcription. If you want to know more, you are more than free to email me at Microsoft, but what you're really looking for is the IT teams to go into the Teams meeting policy and set the media bit rate to a figure that is acceptable. What's acceptable is detailed if you highlight the box that's on that selection, and it will show you the bit rate that is suitable. Just a small tip for bringing much better quality to transcription and, more importantly, audio for these types of environments. As we move on, then we start to see applications like front row. Greg sent me a white paper to read through, which is phenomenal. Lots of detail around how to leverage things like front row, the size of the screens, the positioning of the screens. And then effectively what it means is that you can have these really large images of people that are remote who feel part of the session because they're at eye level. So again, coming back to the experience is all about really the design and the eye level type of things where we see teams being deployed, the room systems being deployed. Pulling through some of the partner solutions, it's amazing to see how many partners you have for the event today, and my sincere thanks goes to those partners for supporting the event. I've just seen a great example of some of the whiteboard functionality on what I would call vendor agnostic screens, so some of the manufacturers. We've also seen a growth in the functionality around the X-ray camera, where effectively it's looking through and at the analog whiteboard as well. If I think about actually starting the session, it is like a Formula One pit stop. I was really lucky today. I walked up here, took me about 10 seconds to plug the cable in. 5 seconds later, it's all on the screen and I'm ready to go. Sometimes it's not like that for a plethora of reasons. And so one of the things that we're doing with the room system is just continually looking at how we optimize the join experience so that a lecturer can walk in, they don't have to worry about the tech, it's press, go, and away the session starts. The other thing that we've delivered is NFR functionality, whereby, I've left my phone up there, where I can walk in with a mobile phone and it will know it's me, and it will join me to the meeting or the session that's designed to take place in this room, say. Ian, that's fine, that's functionality, but we have to deal with a lot of the back-end stuff as well. So how do we know when things are not working? Just in case you're not aware, there is this phenomenal tool called the Call Quality Dashboard, which is able to tell you when a Teams call has worked and not worked. That can be down to the device, the software level, the patch condition, the network performance, the type of Wi-Fi, interference from other Wi-Fis. So there's a whole ton of statistics which can support that deployment. Inside the Office 365 Admin Center, we've increased the number of administration roles, which will allow you to have control over what I would call your domain, the AV domain. So for instance, you've got one here which is Teams Device Administrator. Teams Device Administrator will give you access to things like the call quality dashboard. So if you're having to troubleshoot these types of scenarios, there's absolutely a deep level of detail that can assist. Ian, you're going quite deep. Yes, I am going quite deep because I feel that, we're starting to refine the way in which we really start to deploy and manage hybrid. We start to focus on the small details that are driving the real impact. One of those is around data and artificial intelligence. We're doing a ton of work on statistics that can be pulled out of teams. It also means that we can start to lay these out in a way which help us respond to things like leaders, to educators, to students, and give those personal insights about how well they're doing, what's impacting them, and then really how the technology can assist in the way it's meant to assist. So that's what we're seeing at a Teams today level. That's what's really happening now and in the short-term future. Just going back to Teams and some of the AV features, I looked through the roadmap, and every month we publish a PowerPoint which has about 230 slides in it, and it goes through every feature that's going to be delivered on the Teams platform in the next 90 days. So if you don't mind, I picked out a couple that I thought might be relevant. We're going to deliver roaming bandwidth controls. I deal with a lot of escalations to do with China and other countries around the Teams experience. Like every manufacturer, we are beholden to the Great Chinese Firewall. That's their prerogative, obviously. We have to work around that. So what we're doing is we're looking at how we can control the bandwidth in these remote areas. And effectively, we're just introducing some better controls which say, hey, if there isn't much bandwidth available, we will automatically turn off features like video, but turn it back on when the bandwidth improves, or give the option to turn it on at least. So what we're trying to do is just bring those little features together which provide better control. The other one is casting from Teams desktop to the Teams room system. The guys here have done a great job. This was a great experience, 14 seconds overall end to end, and I'm presenting. But if I wanted to roam around with my device, because I'm that kind of lecturer that likes to walk and talk and draw, then effectively we're going to deliver that as a native functionality to the Teams room system very soon. One that is asked for so much, which I've started using, is hide your own video. So, we all accept that we're confident on cameras. Don't like to look at myself all the time though. So I just want to reduce my video down and get rid of it. That's now here. That's in preview and that's coming out really soon. The other one that I don't know if you use much, the usage statistics are quite low, but it is Spotlight. So for instance, when you have a signer, which is going to be part of the lecture, being able to pin that person's video as one of the video feeds that everybody sees. So no matter when the video is dancing around because people are coming on video and going off video, then the spotlight remains there as a fixed source. So again, it's just one that adds significant value to someone who has an accessibility requirement. If we then look at send video to hardware, this feature is coming along very soon. So we're working with some of the hardware vendors to say, hey, take a feed straight out, and you can effectively treat it as much more of a production platform. And then just to finish this section off, we're doing the same with audio, so providing isolated audio feeds. So you can effectively start to break down those audio streams and manage them accordingly. Okay. So for me, this is sort of very much giving the level of detail that we need to give to you guys to deliver this rich experience that you've been used to delivering for a while. The next piece I want to move on to is just a quick update on Stream. We had to make some changes to Stream, and I don't know, were any of you on the call that I did 2 weeks ago? No hands up, no. Okay, so we did an update call to the JISC Office 365 Managers Group, where we just ran through some of the changes that we've had to make to Stream. It was its own proprietary platform. it really sat outside of Office 365, even though the naming said it was part of Office 365. So what we've done is completely re-engineered it and started to deliver some of the functionality that you would expect from a platform like Stream. It sits in SharePoint now, which is our big storage platform that customers have access to. So you can assign data loss prevention credentials to it, you can assign compliance credentials to it. If you don't want people to forward or share videos, you can manage that. But more importantly, if you run an event where there are, say, 200, 300 or 400 external people, it's so much easier just to send a link out to those people now and really start to share the video. The other things that you can do is that transcription. We've delivered the first phase of transcription, so I can effectively download a VTT file, edit it, and then re-upload. And then over time, we're going to re-deliver inline editing. But again, these are the things that this does now, and we get drawn into so many conversations around lecture capture, integration into Panopto, storing Panopto in Stream, moving videos into the VLE, recording business meetings, that it starts to bring a relationship between Stream and other video providers as well. I'm going to publish this slide deck out, but two of the URLs that might be quite useful are really looking at the roadmap. So please feel free to click on those and have a play. People that are on the online session, hopefully you can click through those links now if you want to take a look. The next piece is Mesh for Teams. This is hugely exciting, and it's certainly one of my areas of passion that I love talking about, because what we're seeing is that people are used to AR, VR and MR, so augmented mixed reality. And those types of scenarios are really starting to hit customers. Mercedes have reduced their site visits to vehicles by 60% because their engineers are wearing a HoloLens and effectively talking to a remote expert. We're seeing the same. Imperial are doing some work around medical, as other universities are as well. And we see that very much starting to become a really accepted way of running and driving a course. You'll be familiar with this. But what we want to see is, how can we make it more pervasive? How can we start to collaborate virtually and create that common understanding by appearing to be in a situation with someone? We might have some people in a room on campus, but we might have some people remotely. So we now don't have to stop the boundary at audio and video. We can get really immersive, situational, and also understand body language and body reactions as well. Working with colleagues, this is one that's absolutely designed to show how people can learn together. We've got someone who's physical in the room, we've got someone who's an avatar, and we've got someone who's remote. How do we then move that on to things like remote assist? We've just delivered integration to a couple of the big health platforms, which means that doctors can do online examinations, but meetings and sessions. But how can we bring that into education? How can we really start to use this to really foster that deep experience? We did a piece of work with Accenture, and Accenture are one of the pilot customers for the first version of Mesh. We wanted to release avatars. So effectively what you see here is that Omid is absolutely himself, and then Marta is absolutely an avatar representation. But if Marta moves her face, then we're going to pick that up and replicate the reaction into the avatar. So it's an emotional enabled avatar. It will absolutely react to what Marta does and how she does it. How does that look in online sessions? Well, it absolutely means that you can mix. So again, one of the scenarios for me is confidence. How can I give someone who's quite shy the ability to be part of a lecture that's mixed, that's hybrid, but absolutely not have to show themselves in their purest, their rawest state? So for me, this starts to unlock many opportunities for people to realise their own potential, but also be knowledgeable of the things that make them nervous. So this is really starting to grow in popularity. It's going to hit the street soon, so you'll start to see us talk more about the avatar-based version of Mesh really soon. Then we move on to one-to-one meetings, and for me, the next slide is by far the most exciting. You know, how do we get to these environments which are already in development? This is actually Accenture's office in London, where they had people in London working by a large whiteboard, and we also had people remote as well. So just going one stage further, how do we then turn that into situational environments as well? So this is absolutely a virtual environment, but it feels physical. So again, that word has been coined, phygital. It's a mix of digital and physical as well. And then really to finish off this little piece, all of these people are remote and working from other locations. So effectively what they're doing is, stepping the slides on, is starting to be part of that session. So again, please watch out for what's happening with Mesh, and again, some of the functionality that's going to be delivered quite soon. We're going to open out to Q&A in a minute. I've got a couple more sections to run through. The next one for me is what we call Azure Communication Service. Ian, what is Azure Communication Service? It's what makes Teams. It's the building blocks of what Teams is. It's the building blocks of what Skype was. And what we've decided to do is open out the source code effectively. So what it means is that if you want a baked and finished product, you have Teams. If you want to look at student life cycle, student recruitment, and you want to manage that journey from initial interest through to starting at the university, you might involve a CRM package. That might be Dynamics. But in essence, as part of that, you can have audio and video interactions. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see this thing called custom apps. In the middle is Microsoft Graph. So, you know, the service bus of commands that says, if this happens, do this, and if that happens, do that. So router call here, router video call there. There's a student in financial difficulty, so instead of going to health and well-being, we want them to go through to support services, so steer that call to another destination and provide the assistance that they really need. So we're opening out the source code to start to build these applications. And one of the things that I get, I'll skip past that slide. One of the things that I get really excited about is that you're doing a ton of work. Your universities are doing a ton of work around the student app, the student experience app. But instead of having to say, call student services, what if you were able to embed the Teams code underneath the student app and then effectively just go, call? You don't have to leave the app on the mobile phone. You can have that functionality built in. And as per a couple of slides back, it will just go straight through to someone who can have a real life call. Or what if the journey is to go to a bot? Hi Ian, how are you? What can I help with? Yeah, feeling a bit low today. Ran myself out of money at the weekend. I've got some heavy grade lectures this week, could really do with some assistance. Cool. Here are some FAQs that might help, or if you really need assistance, just hit the call button or let us know when we can call you back. So that seamless experience that connects Teams and the experience in your student apps and makes it work as one. So some of the situations are voice and video, messaging, and then programmable media. And by programmable media, we mean bot-based type of interactions. So in closing for this section, on the middle we have everything that is the Azure product set, the Azure Communication Service product set. So what makes Teams work? And then on the right-hand side, we have very much a toolkit in Office, which means that you can embed that functionality into the rest of the Office suite. You know, take this type of delivery. The guys here might have chosen to build a completely custom page instead of having to get people to open the Teams web app or the Zoom web app and then just have that experience that's really tailored and branded as UEA or LTSMG as well. This is fine, Ian, but, and I'm very pleased with the speaker that's coming up after me. This is going to be a great segue, so I look forward to that section. But skills are mine, yours and everyone's future. You know, if we look at that piece of technology that we've just shown, it's an evolution of skill sets. And what we've spent a lot of time doing is building out the Microsoft Learn platform. If you're not registered with Microsoft Learn, I would encourage you to do so, learn.microsoft.com. And then effectively, there's a whole load of assistance there which can help you with learning paths. So for instance, if you've just found that last section really interesting, then again, you can go into the learn.microsoft.com portal and pick out a learning path which can get you to that end game. The end game might just be a beginner, it might be an intermediate, it might be an expert. You might decide, I love AV, but I want to go and do something else. And we've absolutely got learning paths which can help you do that. There's paths for developers, there's paths for IT pros. Come on. And then last but not least, a topic of immense popularity at the moment is for data and AI, artificial intelligence. You know, how can you really embed artificial intelligence into the daily life and journey? I'm going to bring it to a close now. I wanted to get through so that we could do the Q&A piece. But before I do, I'm just going to close out with a summary. A very humble thank you for the last 2 and a bit years and all the help that you gave keeping millions of students in teaching and learning and lecturers able to do so. And also thank you for the invite to the event. We really do cherish it, and I thank you because this is now the 3rd one that I've done in 3 weeks, so they've all been great fun. But I leave you with this idea just to channel back, and I hope you've spotted the deliberate typo in the middle of the bottom line. We would love to hear from you. What do we need to be doing to connect with you as a community? Do we need technical workshop days? Do we need to run once a quarter product update days to show you the roadmaps of what's coming along? So what I would encourage you to do is really feed back to the LTSMG leadership team about how Microsoft can serve you better and support you better to do the job that you do on a daily basis. So with that, I'm just going to close and say many thanks.
Ian, thank you so much for an absolutely fantastic presentation, really mind-opening, and I've learned a new term, fidgetal.
Yeah, fidgetal.
I'm definitely going to take that one away.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether we should, but it's a good one, isn't it?
It's great. So surely there's going to be some questions, and if for nothing else, it's the opportunity to use the LTSMG catch box. Now, health and safety, if you've got open bottles of water or coffee cups, okay, just hold on to your hats. Right, here we go. Let's see if I can land it.
Oh!
And it turns on automatically, doesn't it? Yeah. Obviously, where we're all education customers, we end up with greatly, we have the we have the education client or the education version of Teams, which obviously has differences to the business commercial one. Assignments, when you create a team, it says, do you want a class, do you want a whatever. And I know from experience with children at secondary school the great power that those environments are getting out of using Teams education. As you say, in universities, we generally have our VLEs, which do a lot of that functionality already, and the LTI stuff's already interesting how that will integrate.
Yeah.
But certainly, I'm interested on the roadmap. Are there 2 flavours of Teams, as in the commercial and education is a one-size-fits-all for all stages of education, or is there a concept of Teams higher education, kind of to differentiate it from?
There's the concept of integrating higher education-centric apps into Teams. You know, the base level is going to be Teams because we see that as we added a lot of functionality to do with education per se. So when COVID hit, I was drawn into an escalation where there were 1.4 million videos about a Teams call being hacked, which wasn't pleasant for anyone. So we instigated things like lobby, organizer, all of those sorts of controls, anonymous. I've dealt with a number of cyber attacks which have come from penetrating voice calls. So, providing those steers. At a functional level, education gets more than the commercial customers, if that makes sense. So,
that was part of my problem at the beginning. When I first had it, it's got an assignment tool. Well, I don't want an assignment tool. All assignments have to go via the VLE. So I had to work out how to hide that, turn that off, this kind of thing. So it was a case of, it almost gave too much on the education. I can see why it's hugely valuable in a school who maybe haven't got those tools already. But yeah, it was interesting, the differences, and discovering those and thinking, wow, because of not all, you can't get rid of it all. I mean, like the roles, where in a team you've got an owner and a member, the way that translates to teacher and student it's kind of, in higher education sometimes it's a bit different and not so binary as it is.
I'm totally with you. I think this is one of the things that we can work on as a feedback loop, because there are things where we can make it easier. But yeah, it's this type of feedback. Whereas if we have calls once a quarter, I'm happy to have these come at me, because there's still room for improvement around the way in which you manage that and turn things off, because it's on by default. So yeah, accepted totally.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ian, two questions actually. You mentioned the diagnostics earlier on. Where do you access that?
You go into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center, then into the Teams Admin Center, and right down the bottom, so it will be off the bottom of the page, is called Quality Dashboard.
But you have to have login credentials for that.
Yeah. And that was one of the reasons for showing the new admin roles, that you can have access to that without a global admin giving you access to the whole of the 365 portal. You can shrink it right down. Okay. So there is the concept of a team service administrator role that just goes in and looks at that data.
Okay, yeah. No, we just installed about 5 of the rooms, so I was curious when I saw that there's a few teething problems, and it might be a question of just getting in and seeing if we can adjust it from there.
Definitely use it, because the types of things that we see are things like third-party malware software that actually interferes with the MTRs because it thinks it's a device, so it's trying to mount the device. URLs that are inside an MTR, because again, third-party malware software looks at it and thinks, okay, bit of a challenge here. So yeah, there's ways in which you can diagnose all of those.
And the second question was, when you mentioned the AI bit about somebody who's not feeling well and they phone in, do you get connected eventually to a real person?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, but is the first stage the AI talking back to you and saying, listen, what's the problem here?
Do you know, it's completely configurable, so it's press 1 for this, press 2 for that, 3 for this, or just type I need help. So on I need help, you can absolutely override the whole workflow and jump to the stage that connects it to a voice person. Yeah, or even just type help.
Lovely, perfect, thanks.
Perfectly configurable. Thank you, great questions, cheers.
Will I get anybody else?
Any more questions from the floor before the catch box gets projected back towards me?
Okay.
It's coming. Heads. Shot. It's a good point for me just to speak to our remote audience. We're live streaming this today. It's a first for LTSMG. We're live streaming this afternoon's sessions on YouTube. So hello, which camera should I look at? Hello to the guys who are watching it on the remote stream. You're very welcome. If you want to tweet in your questions to any of our presenters this afternoon, you can tweet them against the hashtag LTSMG22. We're keeping an eye on that, and we'll pose those questions to our presenters. Ian, thank you again so much for joining us at LTSMG, for your fantastic presentation, and we really look forward to continuing the relationship with Microsoft and maintaining that two-way conversation.
Completely agree. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Have a good
Kate.
afternoon.
Cheers. So, Matt's just going to
Do a quick change over with this.
get the slides ready for the next presenter.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Okay, up to Matt.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. So I'm now delighted to introduce Jack Laidlaw from Middlesbrough College. And Jack's going to talk to us about the new audiovisual technician standard and degree programme that he's launched to address the skills shortage that we have in the industry. So give a big welcome to Jack.
nice to be here. So yeah, AV apprenticeship. So before I press on with this, I think one question that often comes up at the end I've found, which I'll address straight away, is that this apprenticeship is not specific to Middlesbrough College. I do represent Middlesbrough College, I work for the college, and I happen to be the person that was facilitating the development of the apprenticeship standard. But the apprenticeship standard is a national concern, so it's something that can be done, more or less anywhere. So it is a level 5 standard, which is equitable with what you might think of as a foundation degree, and it runs for 24 months, and it's a part-time course. So just a brief history of AV at Middlesbrough College. In 2018, we launched the first AV technology degree in the country, which was a 3-year program, Bachelor of Science program, and pretty soon worked out that it was extremely popular with industry. I've been to lots of events like this to talk about it, and talked to lots of different businesses about it, and everyone was very, very enthusiastic, but not so popular or not visible enough or not enticing enough for the students that we had access to at that point, which is basically people in the northeast of England. So very quickly, we realized that we had to do something slightly different. And at the start of 2019, we started development of the AV apprenticeship, which is about to launch in September this year. So it's been quite a long road so far. I don't know if anyone has ever been involved with the Institute for Apprenticeships at all, but nothing happens quickly. And it's been quite a long road, but we're nearly there. So a brief overview of the scheme. As I say, it began in 2019. A fellow called Graham Massey, I'm sure some of you will know, who's the managing director of a recruitment firm called Jacobs Massey. He was the group chair. So if you want to develop an apprenticeship standard, you need to have what's called a trailblazer group. That's what the IFA call them. And that group needs a chairman. So Graham was the acting chairman. Technically, I was the facilitator. The reason I was technically a facilitator is because, for good reason, all of the content on an apprenticeship standard needs to come from you folks. It needs to come from industry, from employers. And so while as a training provider we helped with a bit of that, technically my role was as a facilitator. So I basically sort of corralled them all together and got all their ideas together and put it on paper. And the Trailblazer group for the development of the standard involved over 30 companies. And these are a few of them. So I'm not going to read out a big long list, but I just thought it was important to put these lists of companies up there because, again, it's worth emphasising that the content on the apprenticeship standard did not come from me. It came from industry, it came from employers. So, in theory, it should be fit for purpose. So, again, sorry if any of you already know this, but when you develop an apprenticeship standard, the place where you start is you start with an occupation. Okay, so the occupation is going to be an audiovisual technician. And you think about what sort of duties that person might want to, or might need to, go through. And we devised those by looking at a number of entry-level job descriptions from a number of different employers. It's quite an interesting exercise, actually, for all of us. The group of employers gave me their entry-level job descriptions, and then we had a chat about what sort of things were on there, how much content was on there. I don't know about you folks, but I happen to think that job descriptions broadly are ridiculous. They tend to be 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 pages of, this is what you need to be able to do, this is what... They're very, 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 very overdone, overcooked, I think. And we had quite a lot of fun going through job descriptions. And quite often, it was interesting because the hiring manager's perception of who they wanted to employ as an entry-level member of staff compared to what the job description said was often very, very different. They were often, expecting someone of an experience level down here, and the job description was usually somewhere up here. So that was quite a lot of fun. So we did that, and we devised 17 duties that the group broadly agreed that an entry-level AV technician would perform. This is just an example of one. I've put that one up first because, as you can see, it's very lengthy, it's very wordy, and it covers quite a lot. I mean, almost all of the occupation, basically. So there's a lot of stuff on that one, and then there are some others that are quite short. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you want to see the apprenticeship standard, you can go onto the Institute for Apprenticeships website, search for audiovisual technician, and it's there. You can see it. So some of them are quite long, some of them are quite short. After you've got your duties, what you need to do is you need to develop groups of knowledge, skills, and behaviours. And again, this is an Institute for Apprenticeships mandated thing. So you need to come up with, okay, what do they need to know, what do they need to be able to do, and what are the general sort of patterns of behaviour and professional communication type skills that someone would need to be able to do to be an audiovisual technician. And again, I haven't included them all, but just a couple of examples. So in knowledge, we've got things like connection of audio system components, signal phone conversion, integrated AV solutions for specific requirements, and AV over IP concepts and operation, things like digital signage, channel distribution, and whatnot. With skills, there are things like integration of projection and displays into part of an AV presentation, root cause analysis and problem solving, that's a bit more of an abstract one, so there are very specific skills, and then there are more abstract things which can cover broader concerns. And then things like clearly advising and guiding event participants, so knowing how to talk to people, for example. And then the last little group, subset of things that we train them to do is behaviours. So these are your more common sort of soft skills, things that you might find on various different standards, things like acting independently and safely, working calmly and methodically in time-sensitive situations, which we all know is really, really important, and being able to modify a personal approach based on the situation. And when we got together with the employer group, these sorts of things came up time and time again as very, very high on the list of importance. Another little thing about an apprenticeship that involves something called an endpoint assessment. So everyone who does any apprenticeship standard, but the AV apprenticeship standard as well, has to go through an endpoint assessment in order to qualify as an apprentice. And for the apprenticeship standard, the AV apprenticeship standard, I should say, it's a two-stage process. They do a written response to 2 project briefs. So one of them is an online event scenario, and one of them is a systems integration scenario. They're presented with those scenarios in writing, and they have someone there to talk them through it as well, and they have to respond with a brief. And the other thing is known as a professional discussion, which is supported or underpinned by a practical portfolio, and that's where the majority of the assessment lies. So that's for their apprenticeship. So apprentices, as you probably know, generally need to spend 80% of their time working and 20% of their time training, or what the IFA call off-the-job activity. In reality, sometimes that 20% can be a little bit higher, but they do have to do a minimum of their time, 20% of their time, training. So that would be, I guess, roughly 1 day a week, but it doesn't have to be 1 day a week. They can do it when they find time, and I'll discuss a little bit more about that model that we've devised in a little while. So that's sort of a very high-level overview of the apprenticeship standard side of it. So if you were to take on an AV apprentice and you want to enroll them onto any standard, but this AV apprenticeship standard specifically, you would need a training provider. So that's the bit where we come in. So as I've said, the apprenticeship standard is not specific to Middlesbrough College. It's a national concern, but if you've got an apprentice, you are going to need a training provider at some point. So that's the bit where we come in. So the training program that we've devised is a development and an upgrade of that original 3-year Bachelor of Science Audiovisual Technology degree that we were running. It's now a foundation degree though, because that matches with level 5 apprenticeship standard. It's validated by the Open University, which means that our graduates and our successful apprentices will not only qualify as trained audiovisual technician apprentices, it means that they'll leave with a foundation degree as well. And they don't pay any fees, which is pretty good, if you ask me. It includes all of the knowledge and skills and behaviours from the apprenticeship standard that I briefly touched upon before. So what we did is we developed the apprenticeship standard, we've got all these knowledge and skills and behaviours, and then we developed the degree in tandem as well. So we just use the degree programme to train them on the knowledge, skills and behaviours. So it's 100% integrated. And that's very, very rare. Some of you may have heard of HTQs, Higher Technical Qualifications. So essentially, the reason that the IFA have brought those in is because they want to assure that there's as much possible coverage of knowledge and skills and behaviours on whatever training programme the training provider decides to enrol that apprentice. It's quite rare that you have 100% coverage like we do, which is quite nice. The training program enables apprentices to develop their portfolio, and that enables them to put together a practical portfolio for that endpoint assessment that I discussed before. So throughout their 2 years with us, they will be working on the portfolio, which means that when it comes to endpoint assessment time, they've got it all there. They can get through their endpoint assessment. Another good thing about this is it's a 2-year part-time course. Traditionally, what a lot of institutions will do is if they run a part-time version of their course, they will just double the length of time what the full-time version would be. So if it was a 2-year full-time course, it would become a 4-year part-time course. We don't do that because we have a slightly different academic year model. We run an extended academic year for our part-time courses, which means that we can teach them part-time, but it only takes them 2 years. That ties in with the 24 months of the AV apprenticeship. And it's delivered remotely. Some of you might be thinking that's a little bit strange. AV is a very practical subject. Absolutely agreed. However, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that this was as flexible as possible and that we didn't end up back at step 1 where we were only dealing with people in the Northeast region. So what we want to do is make this as open as possible so that apprentices can be based more or less anywhere. So all of the tuition is delivered online, all delivered using Microsoft 365, Ian. What we do, if you're an employer and you come to us and say we want to enrol this apprentice on your apprenticeship standard, we say great, that's fine, you can be based anywhere you like, but you need to give them access to this equipment. And essentially I'll send you a spreadsheet and it's got a list of equipment on it. And as long as you can guarantee access to that equipment, they can enrol with us, we can teach them online, they can access the equipment via the workplace. So, in that relationship, we do the teaching, and as employers, your role will be to give them support and access to the equipment. Now, of course, they're going to learn things in the workplace. They're going to learn a lot in the workplace. But it's important to emphasize that there is not an expectation for them to be taught in the workplace. So hopefully that should ease the pressure a little bit for some people who don't want to become teachers, because not everyone does. We've also, over the development of the standard and subsequently, I've had quite a lot of discussions with some employers who might not have access to all of the practical equipment that we specify, because maybe they just do integration, they don't do any events, or they just do events, they don't do any integration, for example. And a lot of discussions have been going on about reciprocal arrangements where employers would sort of move apprentices between premises, between employers, between projects, to give them that access to all of the equipment that they need. Just a very, very brief example of the sort of activity that the apprentices might be going through on a weekly basis. So I said that it's roughly 20% of their time they're expected to spend on their training. And what we want to do, because we're dealing with sort of geographically, let's say, a variety of geographical locations in which the apprentices would be based, we want to make things as flexible as possible for the apprentices to check in with the training program when they can. So, there is 6 modules per year of study, so 6 modules in year 1, 6 modules in year 2. And roughly what we do is we give them 1 hour of tuition per module per week, and that's all archived. So say for argument's sake, they've got a module in first year and it's on audio capture. Well, every week they will have a 1 hour session on audio capture, and they can join that session live if they want to, and it's recorded, and there's a teacher there, and they'll be taking them through whatever the content is, whatever the exercises are. But if they miss it, it's archived, so they can go back and look at it. But they also have 2 further opportunities to check in regarding that module in the same week. So that's 3 opportunities in total for each module. So we're trying to make this as flexible as possible, because we know that they're not all going to be available at the same time. It's just not going to be possible. So as I say, 2 additional sessions. So that's how it might look for, say, audio capture, for example. They've got a 1 hour session on a Monday, and then they've got 2 further 30-minute sessions when they can just check in with their tutor. For something like AV networking, they might have a 1 hour session on a Tuesday, and then they've got 2 extra sessions when they can check in. And then for something like, let's say, systems integration, they've got another session they can check in when they need to. So we're trying to make this as flexible as possible, and we'll refine this and change it as we go based on feedback from the apprentices and from the employers. If you're interested, first steps are to go onto the apprenticeships.gov.uk website and make an account. Then you'll have to recruit someone. If you're taking on one apprentice, you'll have to recruit one. If you're taking on 10, you're going to need to look for 10. I have access to a small amount, and I do stress a small amount of individuals who are interested in this. They're in the North East region and they're willing to relocate, but that's quite a small amount. So it is important to emphasise that the apprentices are not going to come via me. By and large, you're going to have to recruit them if you're interested. As I said before, if you take on an apprentice, you then need to assign them to a training plan, and that would be the foundation degree in audiovisual technology with us. You also need to find an endpoint assessment organisation, but I've done that bit for you. So we've got an endpoint assessment organisation who we're going to work with. Who pays? Okay, so obviously as an employee, you've got to pay their wages. There is a national minimum wage for apprentices, and then there's a slight uplift if they do their first year and they continue into their second year. So you'd have to pay their wages. In terms of the cost of the training, companies with a pay bill over 3 million already pay at the apprenticeship levy, as I'm sure you're aware. And the funding for that training and for the endpoint assessment comes from those payments, and the government apply a 10% top up if you pay into the levy. If you pay into the levy and you don't have enough funds, you've already sort of spent it on other sorts of training, you can pay 5% of the outstanding balance, and the government pays the rest up to the funding band maximum. And if you don't pay into the apprenticeship levy at all, if the company's got a pay bill below 3 million, you pay 5% of the outstanding balance and the government pays the rest, up to the funding band maximum. And that funding band maximum bit is the final tick in the box that we're waiting for before we start to run in September. So anyone got any questions for me? Hi. I need to throw you this, don't I?
Yeah, go for it, Jack. I know you want to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a quick question regarding the units that do go and start that program. You know, if they're not lucky enough to have dedicated AV people, then they rely on IT people, for instance, to manage their AV infrastructure. What kind of support will the apprentices expect to have internally within the workplaces that they have? Because they might have questions regarding certain things that the people who are in charge of the equipment that they have, they might not know the answer to. So from a training, I know that they're not supposed to be teachers, but they're supposed to support the apprentices as much as possible.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good question. So we strongly advise that all apprentices have what's called a workplace mentor. And if say, for example, you're the employer and you're in this situation where you don't feel that you've got someone there who can act as a workplace mentor, even on an informal basis, who's got the knowledge, then you might want to rethink whether you've got the capacity to take on an AV apprentice. You know, and I think that probably goes for any type of apprentice, really. As I say, the training provider does the majority of the teaching, but of course they're going to learn things in the workplace. There's no requirement for them to be taught in the workplace, but yeah, they do need some support there, and ideally a formal workplace mentor. And if there's nobody there, then you might need to rethink. Do you think you might be in that situation? Is that why you asked?
Well, in Oxford anyway, yes, we are lucky enough to have some units to have dedicated AV people, but the majority of the university doesn't. So if there is a massive shortage of professional AV people, you need to have someone to support them within the institution. And if the majority of the university doesn't have enough dedicated AV people to support them, or that there's no capacity for them to support them, then it's not really great for the industry itself, because we need more AV people and they need to be trained by someone internally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, are you thinking of an example where an AV apprentice might be just sort of off in a part of the building where you can't get to them?
Well, no, if you, let's say a college, for instance, in Oxford, want to have an AV apprentice, and they didn't have any AV people before, and they want to have a dedicated AV person, realistically it's going to be managed by IT people that might not want to know anything about AV or want to have anything to do with it, but they still want to have an AV person, but they don't want to do anything about it other than potentially, having an apprentice. So realistically, for a lot of institutions, it might be down to the IT people to actually support those types of apprentices.
Yeah, I suppose that's one for the institution to work out, I suppose, isn't it? That's going to be some discussions on what the wisest thing to do.
I'm smiling because I'm at Cambridge. So, you know, I completely understand where you're coming from. And we have that situation, don't we, where you've got colleges which feel sometimes like outliers, and there's no specific AV staff, I think, as you're describing.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge because it means there's a real skill shortage within the institution as a whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Any more questions, please?
The fella at the back, I can't throw that far.
Oh, just watch out for the camera.
Oh, yeah. Are we on? There we go. Cool. You say you're starting this in September.
Yeah.
How many students is Middlesbrough going to be able to support through an apprenticeship scheme?
Good question. At the minute, we're expecting about 30 to join us in September, and we can do that fairly comfortably. If that doubles, then we need to take on more staff, but that's a good problem to have. But yeah, at the minute, we're expecting between about 30 and 40 to start in September.
Cool. Thank you.
Quick reminder for anyone watching on the live stream, tweet your questions, hashtag LTSMG22. That'd be great. Any more questions from within the room? Yeah, just in front of you there, Graham.
There you go.
Oh,
Sorry.
we were going to get you with it sooner or later, Marcus.
Hi. So when you're saying about a list of equipment for employers, is that kind of like a basic list, kind of like mixers, lighting equipment, stuff like that, or is it kind of going more into like, you know, would they be required to have Dante equipment, or, you know, the more kind of?
That's a really good
advanced
question. Yeah, no, we keep that list abstract, and we don't go into sort of, you know, you need to have this model, etc., because it just wouldn't work. The broad areas that it covers are audio, video, projection, networking, and what we call on-site events and online events as well. And so the list of equipment is sort of separated up into those sections. And yeah, we've kept it as abstract and as broad as possible. And quite often I send that list to an employer, they'll come back and say, we've got like 90% of this. We might need to look at getting the other 10%, or as I was talking before about reciprocal arrangements with other places, and usually we can work it out.
Okay.
Any more for any more? Oh, we're going to go far left-hand side. Might need to do a little relay race here. With my left, anyway. Watch your T's.
Where's it go? Oh my dear.
Thank you. So I'm Gus from Ordinate. So I just heard about Dante, and actually I wanted to not ask something, but actually offer, if you do see value on integrating the Dante certification, which has a lot of value for the apprentices, and potentially that could give them also credits for future Avixa, CEDIA, Infocom, these entities that recognize our credit units for our certification. If you see value on that, I'll be open for a conversation. We could, migrate something, because I believe that from the AV over IP section, you might be touching some of the Dante stuff. So why not give these apprentices also levels 1, 2, and 3 certificates that can stack up to their career?
Yeah, sounds great. In fact, recently what I've been doing in order to put that final tick in the box on the funding band bit is specifying what software and what hardware we provide to the apprentices for them to fully go through the learning. Because one of the things we do as a training provider, we factor that into the budget, so we give them all the software that they need, because they can't really come into the college unless they're based in the northeast, but primarily they won't be. And a couple of your products were on the list. Actually, it's not my area of expertise, so I can't talk about it with a lot of knowledge. But I know a couple of your products were on there, so yeah, should definitely have a chat.
Thank you.
Any more for any more? I think we might be there.
All right.
Jack, thanks so much for such a thorough and interesting presentation. It's really encouraging that we've got a new government.
Cheers, mate. Thanks, man.
So it comes to me to introduce our next speakers.
Some 10 years
Feels like we're having a little natural break, which is perfect. I'm going to read the blurb that's actually in, I should call it extract, shouldn't I think, that's in the programme. I'm going to introduce to you again Matt North, Head of AV Solutions at UEA. I'm also going to introduce to you Kay Yeoman, who's Associate Pro Vice Chancellor at UEA. Also Teaching and Learning Enhancement and Professor of Science Communication.
Yes,
That
that's
took a
right.
deep breath.
Yes, it is a deep.
Kay, I'll let you introduce your own presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, cheers.
So, lovely to see everybody here today. I have had a fascinating hour or so in the exhibition space. I'm a little bit like a kid in a toy shop when it comes to these sorts of things. I kind of think, oh, I would really like that. I would really like to use that as a lecturer. I really want my colleagues to be able to use it as well. But Matt has asked me to do a little bit 10 minutes just to kind of say perhaps where we are as a university at the moment as we emerge from the pandemic crisis. As you all know, learning happens in spaces. They are physical spaces, they are virtual spaces, and this new term that I've heard this afternoon, the phygital space, which I think is really lovely, and I think I'm going to use that. We, as everybody did, moved into lockdown in March 2020. A crisis is an opportunity, but what a crisis does is also open up where your gaps are. And we had gaps. We knew we had gaps in terms of assessments, perhaps in terms of the digital estate that we had for content creation. We certainly knew we had gaps in engagement with our students in online spaces. And really our tools that we had just kept on meaning that we could see these gaps and we needed to be able to address them. We have some fantastic tools at our disposal. We have a VLE, we use Blackboard. It was amazing. It coped with what we needed to do. We turned our teaching online within the space of a few days, and of course everybody in this room in their own institutions were absolutely essential to that process. We also had just signed on the dotted line for a lecture capture system, Echo 360. We had gone through a tender process. And of course, throughout the whole of the rest of that academic year, and much of the following academic year, we weren't really able to use it. After all, Echo 360 is a system which could capture within physical spaces like this. Our staff were using it as screencasting, and we have now a job of work to do with our colleagues to turn Echo 360 back to what it was intended to do, which is the capture of content and lectures within physical spaces such as this. Whilst we had Teams, and we used Teams for our meetings, of course, we actually used Blackboard Collaborate. That was our main source of being able to contact and deliver our teaching to our students. And our use of Blackboard Collaborate was vast. We went from very little usage to millions of hours worth of Collaborate recordings. And of course that sets up its own issues as well. What do you do with those recordings afterwards? How long should you keep them for? Those sorts of issues that we are now starting to grapple with as well. We did have some limited use of Zoom. Zoom was used a lot in our medical and health environments because of the blocks that the NHS put on certain tools. So Zoom was used to keep on facilitating with our medical students at a time of great need. Our students were amazing. Our lecturers were amazing. You were amazing. We managed to progress our students. They finished. They gained their learning outcomes. But I think as well, when we knew we had to move into the next academic year, what students would forgive us in a remote emergency situation was not what they were wanting to see in the upcoming academic year. So that, the current academic year we find ourselves in, 2021 and then 21-22, it had to be a far more considered approach. We had to move from something which was emergency to something which was very well thought through. And in order to do that, we had to train our staff in understanding about blended learning delivery. We had to skill our students, so we had to design a student preparedness course. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of that term, a digital native. I don't actually like that term. I don't think it applies to our students particularly. Yes, they can use bits of software, but they had problems with their hardware. They didn't know how to increase their bandwidth at home, for example. We had to teach them how to buy a cable so that they could actually directly put their device into their incoming connections. We had endless supplies of cables that they would then pick up so that they could get better Wi-Fi access in the halls of residences. So there were lots and lots we had to do to skill our students, it's not just in terms of the software, the hardware, but also how they interact in an online space. Right at the start, when I was delivering my lectures, it was really hard because they didn't want to come on camera. We didn't have the avatars particularly. They could hide. And that has implications for well-being as well, as you know. It's easy, it was far easier for them to hide. So we had to think of ways of how are we going to draw our students out in this virtual space. The chat was a really useful function in order to do that. The ability for a student to be able to use a virtual whiteboard, that was incredibly powerful as well. But we had to teach our students to be respectful of those spaces, and we also had to teach our academics to facilitate within these spaces as well. And those aren't easy skills to come by, and we had to really think about how we were going to do that. What we're trying to do is to move towards more sophisticated blending learning opportunities. We have been at UEA a blended learning provider for well over 2 decades. We were one of the early adopters of Blackboard. And I think what's been a little bit difficult for me over the last 2 years is to hear the term or see the term blended learning, which has an amazing amount of pedagogical research that sits behind it, being misappropriated by both the government and the media. Because what they are saying is that blended learning is just about being online. Blended learning is not about just being online. Blended learning is about a whole mixture of pedagogical practice, not necessarily technology, but certainly can include technology, to enable a student to have agency and mastery and to gain the learning outcomes for their own specific discipline. And when I see government reports which talk about blended learning concessions, it really worries me that when we have students coming in and we talk about our blended learning practices, they are just thinking, oh, you're just going to deliver it online. And that's simply not the case at all. We are a campus university here. We have an amazing, wonderful campus, and I hope you've had some chance to enjoy it in the sunshine. We want our students to come back to us. We want our students to engage with us in a classroom, but to use all of those fantastic technologies which we know that we can have at our disposal, screen sharing, for example, being one of those in small classroom environments. We want to get to that position. We don't necessarily want to have hybrid or remote, but that is something which we are considering. We know our students do better with us when they are here. Again, they can't hide, and they can access all of those well-being facilities that we know that many of them need as we emerge out of the pandemic to help them succeed in their studies. So I just want to kind of finish before Matt comes up just to say that we are trying to progress. We know that we have gaps that we need to fill, but we are doing so trying to understand the broader education environment in which higher education now sits. Hand over to Matt.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kay. That was a really good overview, I think, of where we've been. So, to build on what Kay said, I'm going to talk a bit about what that's meant for us as AV technologists and what we've had to do within my team, what I've had to do, what my support team have had to do to help, I guess, resolve the challenges that we've all found and faced as a result of the pandemic. Ian mentioned in his talk about the expediting rollout of Teams. So I think here at UEA, we had, as of February, March 2020, we had a 6-month rollout plan, I think, to roll out Teams across the university, and we achieved that in 7 days. So we really did expedite that, and the university did rely on that to operate from a meeting perspective over the course of those very insular months of 2020. For us as an AV team, we're incredibly fortunate to have a learning technology team within our ITCS department. They are learning technologists, they are technologists, but they also understand the pedagogy. So they were working very closely with our academics to support them in the transition online. So whereas I know many of you, through the conversations I've had, not just over the course of the last 24 hours, but previously and through the email chat as well, everybody's got a different structure, and I know a lot of you and your AV teams had to take part in that transition. But it was quite different for us because that support almost felt natural. For the academics knew the learning technology team more in depth. They knew who to approach, and a lot of that support and guidance was delivered by that learning technology team. So when we, as an AV team, we're all working from home, we wanted to see how we could help them. So we were looking at some of the calls that they were getting and being inundated with, and looking to see how we could help resolve any audio-visual related issues. And we were actively talking to our staff and assisting them through that. Kay mentioned our lecture capture rollout. So I think as of February and March 2020, we had a plan to roll out our lecture capture solution. And we were going to do it in 4 phases of equipping our 200 plus learning spaces across our campus. And that naturally needed to be expedited. So by the time September came round and we started to see in-person teaching come back, we had completed 3 of our phases of rollout. So we had rolled out about 150 spaces over the course of those months within the pandemic once we were allowed to be back on campus. And it was quite an interesting experience because as we had launched using Echo 360, or our lecture capture platform, with staff working from home, it was an interesting transition for them to come back into the classroom or into the learning space. What did we need to do in the way that we had rolled out audio-visual technology to ensure that staff coming into the room could use the software that they had learnt to use at home and use the technology that we'd put into the room, the hardware, the cameras, microphones, how we can ensure that they felt comfortable in using that. So as a team, we worked really hard to build instructions, have drop-in sessions, film videos, have online resources that staff could access, as well as putting information in the rooms for the staff as well. And as Kay said, and as you've all managed to have a look at, those of you who came on the campus tour on yesterday and you've seen the campus, we are a campus-based university. And as we transition now, looking at hybrid, as I know hybrid, high flex is a big term that is on all of our minds at the moment. The way that I think myself and the team here need to approach supporting the university and moving into hybrid is firstly understanding what we as an institution want from it. But I think it's through the conversation I had with Kay the other week, I think it's a bit chicken and egg. You know, our academic staff, they know they can teach to students in the room, they can teach to students online, but how do they make that experience as similar as possible for those students online as they would for the students in the room? And the technology to deliver that, the specification of the hardware that we had decided upon to roll out for our lecture capture and had budgeted on was to do with primarily capturing the academic within a teaching space. It was capture focused for asynchronous review after the lecture. It wasn't designed as something that the students could remotely synchronously access before the pandemic when we rolled that out. So naturally now we've rolled out all of this kit, we can capture academics really well within the spaces as they deliver their teaching. But for bringing in remote students for hybrid and high flex now, we've obviously got different challenges. We've got challenges with audio. How do we capture student discussion within spaces such as this? And I think what I need to do, and what I'm working with Kay and other key stakeholders across the university, is understanding what those possible scenarios are and developing some pilot spaces for us to actually install some technology, cast out what we think would work based on the requirements that we gather from them, and get that feedback and help build that approach going forward. And I don't think it's going to be an overnight thing for us, certainly here at UEA. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of back and forth, and it's going to take a lot of close collaboration with colleagues across the university to really understand the direction that we're going in. So I feel massively privileged that the contacts that I've got here at UEA and across all the faculties with people like Kay and Emma, who delivered our welcome talk this morning, that we're actively in discussions around how we work together to find our way through this and may ultimately help influence the university's teaching and learning strategy going forward. So, if I can get the kit, I'm hoping to, over the rest of the months of this year, to develop sort of 7 pilot hybrid spaces here within this building, and possibly even this lecture theatre, to look at how we can probably bring remote students in a more engaging experience to in-room teaching and use some key champions and digital champions. We've got a great group of digital champions across all of our faculties here at UEA to help get their feedback on teaching in these spaces. So that's really about it, I think, what I wanted to say. I've talked a lot, obviously, over the campus tour and the presentation this morning, so we can probably close off there and just offer the next 10 minutes for questions.
Let's do that. You've introduced your own questions. So the catch box is out in the wild. I can see it's sat just there behind Greg. Well, there we go. Launch it, Greg. There we go. Heads.
Oh.
Well, I felt that.
Well done.
An ex-cricketer. A couple of things, really. Question for Kay. In the online, when you had to move to online teaching, did you have an increased need for TAs, particularly for large cohorts?
Yes, because learning needs facilitating in those online spaces. So yes, we needed teaching. I presume by TA you mean teaching assistant.
Yes,
yeah. Yes, because whereas we would have small groups in large spaces and a facilitator would be able to move around, it was actually much harder to hop between groups within a Collaborate space. You can do it, you can hop in and out, but we found it much better if we had a small group of TAs who could also help us with those groups. Because some of the groups that we set up, some were fine. I think it depended on the groups of personalities of the students you had, because you could the way we did it in Blackboard was that we had, they were randomly assigned a group and they just sort of popped in and they went into those groups. So some groups of students were fine and they could get on with the task. Others needed a lot more help in order to kind of get themselves going, a kind of like an inertia barrier. So We needed that support. And I think this is one of the reasons why we want to take a hybrid, high flex approach carefully and in a considered way, because we know that one facilitator for this type of learning is not going to be enough to deliver the same experience online as you would perhaps gain in a room.
Which leads me to my next comment, actually, because I think the caution with that is very advisable. Coming from a university, we did a complete knee-jerk, every teaching space, 360 hybrid teaching spaces, and there's no such thing as hybrid. You're absolutely right, it's the activity. We've got lecturer-led sessions, student-led sessions, you know, it's got to be modal. You can't just have picking up the audio and an entire lecture theatre is not the right thing to do. So I think your caution is the right way to go, to be honest, yeah. So,
kind of following on from that we had the knee-jerk reaction, we put everything hybrid, but we're very much a campus-based university, and that's the driver. And you keep saying you're a campus-based. How much in 2-3 years' time do you think hybrid will actually exist, or will we slip back into the old ways? That might be the right way. It's right for some people to be hybrid, but others getting the students back into the space, and then how, you know, is it worth investing in hybrid? And then, as you're saying, if you're going to do 7 pilot rooms over the next year or so, it's going to take a long time, and that the impetus to do hybrid that we've had over the last 2 years will have gone potentially here where we've got it as well. We're trying to get everybody back on campus. Now, I'm not convinced it's going to be a thing for teaching anymore. Do you think that it will continue?
I think it will continue under some programmes which are specifically designed to be that way. So, for example, before we had the pandemic, we had a programme with Africa, where those African students, it was a designed programme where, you know, they were going to join in with learning, which was happening at UEA with their cohorts of students. Now, that was planned, and the teaching was designed to be that way. And I think that that's where we will see hybrid develop, as something which is designed from scratch as being that way, rather than I'm going to take my normal degree in biological sciences, which is my area, and turn that into something which is hybrid, because that isn't going to work. I think if you're a successful hybrid, has to be built in from the start with underpinned pedagogical approaches. And then it will be successful. And then we will be able to book and use rooms such as the ones which Matt are describing to be able to facilitate that learning for those students. But I think that it would be a mistake just to say we're just going to do a hybrid version of our current existing degree programmes. That wouldn't be the right way to go, in my view.
Yeah, I think it's not business as usual, but doing it hybridly. It's, you know, we're going to take that time to really figure out how we're going to teach on certain programs, and then obviously the technology then supports or needs to support the ways that we design the teaching.
So we've got a question just behind you. That's the closest one, if you just want to launch it over there. Thank you.
Guys, thank you for the presentation. Kay, I was amused and informed by your riff about the misappropriation of blended learning, and speaking as someone on the supply side of things, I've been through very big learning curve myself. I felt like one of my kids, starting to use a word before they've actually know what the meaning is. And Pete and I have been talking about that. But I was wondering, having said that, have you actually published a definition or sort of terms of reference? Is there something where you could sort of show some leadership or help mentor people to use these terms correctly?
Certainly within the university, yes. We have our definition of what we consider blended learning to be. And whenever I go out and I speak at conferences, I am saying what we consider blended learning to be. But of course, you know, blended learning has been around for a really long time. There are many definitions of it in the education literature, and there is much evidence of its benefits to the university and student learning experiences. So it's not a case of me saying that this is what we've got a UEA definition of what we think it is, but I wouldn't want to dictate to those scholars who've worked in this space for a really long time for me to tell them what it is. You only need to go into Google Scholar and type in blended learning, and the thousands and thousands of papers will come up around the world. And I think that is the thing that frustrates me the most, is that when it is talked about in government circles and when we have government reports that solely talk about blended as just being online, it just means that they have not done their due diligence. They haven't gone out and researched the term or understood how it's used within an HEI context or indeed an FE context.
Thank you for your presentation and also about your thoughts for the future. I really like them. But what I miss with this discussion in general, not only here, is the spaces. Because we use with blended, okay, we have all pedagogical forms of didactics. There is a lot of literature about it. And hybrid is more the managed way. Hybrid is now the panacea for the period that we have just left. But we still have many spaces in the conventional way. Do you take that with you? Because that is quite a strategy change for universities about buildings. And of course, there is difference in academic years, and there's difference in pedagogy, difference in tracks. I know that, but how do you think about that? Do you really rethink your spaces with it?
I think there is some universities are really thinking about rethinking their spaces, that perhaps they are not putting investment into large lecture theatres like this. But I don't think the lecture is dead as a pedagogical technique. The lecture is an experience in itself, isn't it? And I'd be very sad if a student came to UEA and didn't experience a large lecture with 400 people in a ranked space like this and had a lecture from somebody who could really hold an audience, because that's such an experience and it is part of a student experience. What it doesn't happen is every time, because you know every single lecture is different. But I think that these spaces are actually good spaces for collaborative learning. We've learned to do it, we've learned to do it well. And, you can have breakout groups, you can walk up and down, you can facilitate. So I wouldn't want to get rid of them, because a big, large-scale lecture is an experience, and I think that's one that we would want to keep. But it's about keeping it, not always doing it, not to be always the person being the sage on the stage, as they like to say. Mm-hmm. We have to have mixed practice.
And I think, just adding to that, I think we've got 5 lecture theatres on campus here of this size. And in the new spaces or refurbished spaces that we're looking at, we are looking at smaller numbered and capacity spaces. We aren't looking in our refurbishment plans to put another 400-seat lecture theatre in anywhere. We're looking at, I think, 30 maximum capacity in the ways that we want to teach in the kind of capacities and groups that we're aiming to teach going forward.
Sorry to add on, because we are now in this lecture hall, and I really have to turn my back for over 2 hours nearly. Don't you think that another furniture or revolvable furniture would help? And perhaps, let's say, break down these large tables so that you can support group work or whatever? Perhaps such things, because there is no literature about that at all. We are working on that, of course, but how do you think about such things? It's more beneath what you see beneath those experiences.
Yes, and I think that's right. I would love to be able to have seats that people could swivel round, and that these parts could come together, and you can have a bigger table. I think that would be absolutely fantastic. I really do, and I think that it would help people see how they could do active learning within a lecture theatre environment, but still retain a lecture theatre experience when you wanted to have one.
Interesting you should mention that, because when we were designing 2 of our new lecture theatres at the business school in Cambridge, we did exactly what you described there, Pete. We did like office chair style furniture, meaning that you could swivel them round and actually do group work. And that was 2017, so that was way ahead of the pandemic. But actually, it's worked really well, and I think that's a design we'll see rolled out into other spaces. Yeah. Ian?
No, good. Kay, thank you for the presentation and the insight again. The one thing I'm just going to ask is, I wonder whether hybrid and pandemic are going to become mutually negative in people's minds, and whether we need a completely new term like locationless learning or something, because, you know, as vendors, we always try to put a technology slant on terminology, which we quite rightly get slapped for. But I wonder whether, you know, the use of the word hybrid, people are automatically going to associate with pandemic, and we need to come up with a really fresh view.
I think that's an interesting suggestion, and I think that terminology is everything, and I've had discussions with my colleagues, and some universities have again moved away from the use of the word blended to try and have something different. But for me, I was suggesting to my college that we needed to do #ReclaimBlended, because it's really hard to think of another term of what that could be. I think hybrid, though, I think there are other terms. I think, yes, hybrid, to me, it feels difficult. It immediately makes me not shudder necessarily, but it feels hard. So putting another term on it, but it's about also use cases, isn't it? To sort of see how other universities are doing it, you know, how they're approaching it, what their students are actually doing, how are you bringing students together. I think one of the vendors who I have emails from occasionally, they've set up a timetable system where a student can decide, am I going to be an online learner for this event, or am I going to be a physical learner in this event? And they wouldn't have developed that product were there not universities out there who want it. So, and again, that makes me think, how is that going to work out? How are you going to get the engagement with the online group and the in physical space group? I could see, because we did it quite well with the group of students who are online and who could be facilitated through a TA. They operated well, and then you operated those in the room well, but how do you operate the online and in the room together? And I think that is the hard thing, and that's kind of perhaps where the avatars come in, and actually being able to see people, having the online people actually seeing them there, I think is the development that needs to then happen for there to be this more seamless learning going on between those two groups of students. But I think we're a way off that yet. In the same way that I feel that we're still a little way off some of the virtual environments that you were kind of showing, the matrix, I think you said. Yes. Because it's about how you do that at scale. I mean, Matt and I, you know, we did some good virtual reality sessions with vendors, but it's for small groups of people. How do you scale that? And at what point, as a university, do you go into that technology knowing that in 5 years' time, you're going to have to completely upgrade everything because it has moved on so quickly? At what point do you go in? And I kind of feel that this type of the hybrid technologies, the avatar technology, the technology about virtual augmented reality, all fall into that category of at what point do you do you invest?
Good. I think I've got one more from Mark.
Cheers. Yeah, this is one for both of you, I suppose. What's your experience of and thoughts or plans for assessing digital skills of staff? So, for example, I've had a lecturer tell me they shouldn't have to come in 10 minutes early before the lesson to make sure the projector's working. I've had another one tell me a projector's not working, in this case, a Windows P. How do you sort of address that issue?
I think that's a very good question. I think that everybody's skills need updating all the time. And, Matt's team does a brilliant job in that. So maybe hand over to you to sort of explain how you approach that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, we hold regular drop-in sessions for our academics, and we're really proud of our support service and response time, but I completely understand what you're saying there. And we work very closely with our Centre for Technology Enhanced Learning, which are our learning technology team I mentioned earlier, and they do a lot of work in kind of helping upskill staff. We're also kind of going through a period of change where we're hoping to start defining and kind of helping develop staff training plans as well. And with that, I think we're going to need to align our AV strategy for rollout for things like automation. What can we do to help support our academics in the space when things go wrong, either remotely or in a way that it's self-healing. And obviously in the AV world, that's, we're just, as Jack was saying, we're still very physical in that sense, but I think, there's work there for us to do, but I think it's a mutual thing in the way that we work with our academics and our learning technology team to help deliver that.
Thank you.
Maybe just got time for one more question. Just Marcus over at this side, if you can launch it across the width of the theatre.
Thanks for the presentations, and my question is around the sort of dance that we've been doing around hybridity or multimodal delivery and your relationship with it, which seems to be cautious, which seems sensible, but it's really about the student contract that we have, and our relationship around student experience, paritative experience, and institutional digital transformation. So if we're all very quick to reference the last couple of years as having that sort of transformative effect on spaces, people, digital skills, teams, equipment, but the validation processes in universities are very slow. And actually, you've hit the nail on the head a number of times around we can't quickly transform something that has a modality to it to something that is multimodal. That takes work and effort, and it's a collaborative effort. And I think this is really the first time that it needs to be multidisciplinary across the learning technologists, the AV teams, academics. Where does that sit institutionally for you? So when you look at digital transformation, what's driving that? Because you're taking a cautious approach, but then how will you start to really define how you adopt multimodal practice, and particularly for practice-based aspects and campus-based aspects? How do you see that unfolding in the next chapter?
I think that it does sit with me. It sits with my portfolio of work as the learning and teaching enhancement. I bought in and argued for lecture capture. I've argued for a better end-to-end examination system. I've argued for better e-marking tools for our staff to use. So I think it does sit with me, and I think that I'm gathering examples of where staff would like to develop something perhaps which is fully online, but we need to make sure that that is, is pedagogically correct, that we build it up from learning objects, that we have good quality materials, which is why we also need to invest in content creation tools as well, but also invest in the people who know how to do that, because it's not always the academic who knows how to turn their content into something which can be consumed online and will allow them to achieve their learning objectives. So I think there has to be more investment in people, experience, It has to be the right programme as well, to be designed at the right time. It's got to have a market out there. It's got to be market driven, because these are expensive to produce and they're also expensive to run. I think that there does sometimes tend to be a bit of misconception that online learning is cheap. We all know that online learning is far from cheap. It's not a cheap option at all. And so we absolutely have to invest in the right tools, the right people. It has to be the right programme that we know that students want. A bit like the apprenticeships, you know, identifying that gap that there is and being able to fill that gap with the appropriate content and the right course. I'm not sure if I really answered your question, but that's the type of thing that's the knowledge I'm trying to get from my colleagues from across the whole institution, students, staff, academic staff, professional service staff.
I think the tricky bit there as well is how you assess quality for a course that's multimodal and been designed for multimodal delivery, when historically we haven't got much evidence around what works well pedagogically in those spaces.
I think we have some. I think that there are frameworks that are being developed. We do have our own internal frameworks as well. We have quality assurance that we adhere to for certain specific subjects as well. So I think that it's out there, but I think that it needs to be brought together and further developed, because it's not all there at the moment in one place. But we do, you know, everything that we do, any course that we offer here has to go through quite a rigorous process of course proposal, course validation. And as you say, that takes time, takes a lot of time. You're not always necessarily brilliantly reactive to the market out there. And it may be that, you know, we don't, the first off the post isn't necessarily the one who wins in the end. So I think that we've got to be really considered. I've got no problems with being really slow and considered about adopting a different type of working, a different type of learning within the institution, because we've got to make sure that it's right for us. And as I say, you know, a lot of our students are coming back on campus, just very relieved they're back on campus and that they can meet. And I think one of the things that I didn't have an opportunity to say about is those incidental learning opportunities that students have just by meeting each other in a corridor or in the cafe or in the library, which just didn't happen in any other way. And it's really hard to replicate that in a virtual space.
Great, thank you. I think just very quickly for me to add to that, I think Kay's probably sick of hearing me say from a technologist perspective that I need to be in those conversations as well. And you know, I think we have got a really good group across the university, academics, our technologists within our learning technology team, and myself, to really look at, you know, and be involved in those conversations. So we aren't being brought a resolution and then trying to solve it with technology. And I think, you know, we're really proud of that, in that collaborative nature. I think that has been borne out of the last couple of years.
Great. Matt and Kay, thank you so much for your insights. Thank you very much. So we're moving into our final section of presentations for the day. LTSMG is very proud and grateful for the support that we receive from AVIXA, which is the Audio Visual Industry Experience Association. We've got long-standing links together, and we're very grateful for all the very kind and generous support that we receive. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Ben Barnard, who's going to be giving us an update from AVIXA's activities, and then the eagerly awaited and now infamous LTSMG panel discussion. In fact, while Ben loads up, so to the guys who are watching remotely on the stream, hello again. I hope you're enjoying being part of this from your homes or offices. Don't forget that you can tweet in your questions, particularly for our panel, kind of the most interactive part of our sessions this afternoon. Just tweet the hashtag LTSMG22 We're monitoring the feed, and we will pose your questions to our panel. They're not invisible, but we just haven't put them there yet.
Tense moment. Is it going to work?
Great, Ben, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, can we get the notes on? Oh, sorry. No,
It's going to be amazing.
So, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everyone. Just want to, first of all, obviously say a huge thank you to Adam, Aaron and Dave at LTSMG for having me, and also obviously Matt and the events team here at UEA for putting on such an incredible conference. It's not only amazing to see, you know, all the exhibitions and all the fun stuff that we get to do, but also to recognise that in fact it's the sponsors and it's the you know, it's the belief that the sponsors have in this industry and in this particular sector and the support they give that allows it to happen. So it's really exciting to see, especially for us at Avixa. So my name's Ben Barnard, I'm the Regional Manager for Avixa UK and Ireland, and I'm just here to give you a bit of a update of what we've been doing, what we're up to, and some things that we want to announce. So first of all, obviously the ISC show has been moved to Barcelona in May. Hopefully a lot of you know that already and you didn't attempt to go there in February, although I'm sure it's nice. And it's going to be the first one in Barcelona, obviously. So if you haven't registered already, then do go to iseurope.org and get yourself registered. It's going to be, as I said, it's going to be the first one in Barcelona, and I'm sure many of you will have had that experience where you were at ISC in Amsterdam and somebody came up to you and said, how long have you, how many times have you been here? And you say like 3 or 4. And they say, I've been going here since it was the first one at Amsterdam. So if you come to Barcelona this time, you can be that person, but for Barcelona. You can be that annoying person if you want, it's up to you. But yeah, register, come along, it's going to be great. Another thing that we've been working on recently is the launching of the ECS related discipline card, which you can now get through Avixa. It's really interesting. When we first embarked on the project, for me, I felt that it would probably, the highest uptake would be through integrators looking to get their people on site, when in fact, having spoken to a lot of you here today, it sounds like it's actually going to be very popular amongst your organisations as well. Apparently it's something that has become increasingly difficult over the years as they kind of change the process and remove categories. So now it's great because you can, as long as you have your health, safety and environment certificate, as well as your electrical safety unit, the only other thing you need is an Avixa certification, so CTS, CTS-I or CTS-D, and then you can apply for your card through Avixa. Two of our staff, Gabby and Sarah, who some of you may know as well, also have been certified to be online invigilators. So it means that if you don't have the first 2 bullet points there, you can get that done through us as well. The cost is £45, so it's not going to be any more expensive than anywhere else, and you won't find it cheaper. So we're doing this as a service for our industry, and hopefully it's going to make things easier for you. And on top of that, CTS exams are now available online too. So it is really kind of bringing the whole thing online, making it as easy as possible, and also supporting the CTS community as well as other communities too. So if you want to go to avixa.org/ECS card, then you can see more information about that and you can apply. And then the next big thing that we've launched recently is the Avixa Exchange. So it's a platform, it's a hub, it's a place that's purpose-built for the entire Pro AV industry. It's a place where you can network, you can share ideas, you can launch articles, you can talk about events, and you can hopefully find other experts in that area or in different areas, and you can share these ideas, and hopefully it's growing quickly to be the place where, you know, if it's happening in our industry, it's going to be happening on the exchange as well. At the moment, it's actually only open to individuals to sign up, and a select few what we call providers. So if you've ever had any experience with Avixa and you've ever logged in online to look at your renewal units or to take a course, you already have credentials to sign in to the exchange. So if you want to get on there, we're sort of sitting at about 1,500 individual users now, and after ISE, when we'll make a few announcements, that's when we're going to start welcoming providers on. But it's great to see that we had a call with LTSMG the other day, and they've actually launched their own sort of provider profile. So if you go onto the exchange now, you can hopefully see some of your colleagues, follow them, start some conversations, but also you can search for LTSMG and find them there, follow their page, and then stay up to date with the news and things that they're doing. And they've already published a couple of articles, so go and have a look at that. So if you want to take a picture of this, that QR code will take you to the website, which is exchange.avixa.org. And as I say, if you use any credentials that you've ever used before to log into an Avixa website, you can use those in the exchange too. There we go. And finally, in the interest of just keeping things on track, time-wise, just want to quickly run through the member benefits. Now, any of you here who are part of organisations who are members of SCOMs will have access to Avixa membership, most likely. And it's important to remember that the membership allows you an unlimited number of staff who can have access to the materials that we recommend you study to prepare for the CTS, as well as 5 seats at that level of membership, which are elite seats. So it means that 5 members of staff who may have already passed their CTS and looking to go further afield can have unlimited access to all of the education that we have on offer. So that means if you want to be heading more towards the installer track, the designer track, project management, anything like that, you can explore all of that. So be sure to have a word with the rep. If it isn't you that looks after the membership, find out in your organisation who it is, or contact myself or one of my staff in the UK, and we can tell you who that is, and then you can go and pester them and get onto the record. But yeah, it supports certification. There are also a lot of standards which we've developed over the years. Greg Jeffries in the audience has been very kind at helping us develop a lot of the visual standards and been on our steering committee for that. And we always obviously encourage people to join those steering committees too. But they're great if you're embarking on a project that you're not super sure about, or if you've got an integrator in who's doing something, you want to make sure that you can keep them in line in some way, making sure they're doing things to the book. These are published standards which adhere to the ANSI certification scheme, so you know they're good. And finally, there's market intelligence reports, which we have a lot of. This is basically just talks about all the kind of the trends in the industry, where things are going, projection versus LED, all that kind of stuff. And also, of course, now kind of, if we can be so bold to say, post-pandemic, how the industry has changed, where people are migrating to in terms of investment, and how the workplace is looking and things like that. So do have a look at that. As I say, in the interest of keeping things moving, because we've got the panel discussion next, I'm around for the rest of the day, so if you have any questions, do grab me. If you don't get a chance, then feel free to take a photo of that slide. That's my name, email address, and then you can also visit avixa.org or exchange.avixa.org to sign up to that. And that's about it. So stick around, and we'll have the panel discussion for you very shortly. Thank you very much.
Right, give us a few minutes. We've got to do some miking up and a bit of choreography. So maybe stretch your legs briefly. We've got a few minutes, so just don't go very far away, please.
The rules.
for being here, and we're going to jump into a panel discussion now. I think some of the panel you recognise already from a few minutes ago who've presented already, but I'm going to ask you just to go down the line and introduce yourselves for anyone who's just wandered in since then. So, Kay, if you'd like to start.
So I'm Kay. I'm a professor here in the School of Biological Sciences, but I'm also Associate PVC for Learning and Teaching Enhancement.
Hi, I'm Piet van der Zenne. I'm from the Netherlands, and I focus on the qualitative things within education spaces, specifically to the pedagogy therein.
Hi, I'm Caris. I work for Shaw, and I also sit on the AVIXA Women's Council, which I'll be talking a bit more about tomorrow.
Hi, Ian from Microsoft. I work in the education team as a technology specialist.
Hi, I'm Jack from Middlesbrough College. I'm an HE cross-college coordinator, so I oversee quality across our HE provision, and I run a number of creative technology courses.
Thank you very much indeed. My name's Ben, I'm from AVIXA, as you may have seen in the previous presentation. So, first of all, what I want to say is that we have assembled this wonderful panel, and I'm hoping to get a good discussion between them, but also what's important, I think, is as the audience, and the questions have been flowing quite freely already, so that's great. But do remember, if you have a question, stick your hand up, because yeah, that's why they're here. They've all said that there's no question too hard. There's nothing they can't answer. So put that to the faces. Put that to the test. But yeah, please do have your questions ready for at the end, so we can we can have a bit of Q&A and get started with that. But so first of all, the thing we wanted to talk about, I think, in a little pre-discussion was what's next after hybrid. Obviously, a very interesting question, but actually something, Kay, that you touched on, and the questions that were coming out of that previously was the kind of the definitions of these kinds of words. It was blended learning, I think, was the one you were talking about. But I think perhaps because hybrid is something that is used a lot, and it's in the question that we're going to discuss, perhaps we should first start with trying to define that, a definition of the word. You have people here from various areas, so it'd be interesting to sort of have a bit of discussion about what you think it means to you and how it differs from what it means to clients or customers or colleagues in that sense. Who wants to attempt to define the word first?
Well, I don't know about define it. I think what it is in its very basic sense is students in a room and students online both trying to achieve the same learning objectives. And so that's what it is. But that's not a definition. I understand that. Maybe somebody else can have a bash at a definition.
I think it's a very hard definition, and it's a vague definition. It was clear a few years ago when we had this assignment that we wanted to, let's say, have classes, master classes, where people work on oil rigs and they cannot come in every Wednesday night for master classes, and that's what we deal with hybrid. Yeah, a few in class and a few somewhere else. And with the pandemic, video conference came in. It was video conference technology with one video channel and one audio channel. And that's what now is, let's say, looked as, it seems like it is a panacea for all the problems that we had in the last 2 years. And now this definition is going up into an organization where the management really thinks that this works. And they have spent all the money the last 2 years on this video conference technology, while the pedagogy was frozen. We think about the lecture halls, lecture, but now in 2D format. That's what it is. And if you really look to the different ways, I always use my sort of education spaces framework, where you have this, let's say, meeting and information sharing, and that meeting is not the same as a learning activity. If you work with student teams together, there's much more, there's a difference. So the next level, I think, is the participatory level, where you really work with the teacher as coach. You know the methods, you know the technologies, you know the end result. It's clear. And the ultimate level, I say, is more the problem-solving level, where you really have ill-structured problems and work in a different way. And you have that in both the physical domain, as the hybrid domain, and the online domain. And it's not yet clear in all those domains yet. Let's say the hybrid domain is the hardest one, I think.
Yes, for sure.
I wonder if it isn't defined. The example that I'll give is that, you know, we lived in Surrey for many years, and then my wife wanted to become an ecology consultant, and she got the opportunity to do an MSc, but it meant we moved to Cumbria. And, you know, it was almost, I would use the term choice without guilt, because she can learn how she wants to learn. You know, she goes down to the university once a month for a residential, and it's actually an apprenticeship, Jack, as well. So it's, you know, it fits so many things, and it's why I still think we're making the definition of what it actually is going to be. And that's why I worry personally about the negativity associated with the term, because its most recent incarnation is born on the back of a pretty negative global experience.
Do you think it's also possibly a situation that arose from, you know, as you say, like a really very negative global experience that kind of forced a lot of people to have to start understanding technology and not really kind of knowing what box to put it in, and so just thinking, okay, let's pin a word to it. Let's call this hybrid. Because it's kind of hybrid basically means like a combination of at least two things that kind of you would hope created a better result than you know the two separate parts. So perhaps that's the problem. But it is definitely something that needs to have like a common definition, because you know, speaking with clients, speaking with customers, students, if you're talking across purposes, it's like speaking different languages, isn't it?
I think it absolutely does mean different things to different people and different settings. And another term I came across recently was high flex, and the university I was speaking to, it was actually in the States, but for them it was about providing their students with flexibility. And like you were talking earlier about the sort of timetable system to say, well, Monday I'm going to be in the lecture room, but Tuesday I'm going to be at home and online. So yeah, it definitely seems to mean different things to different people. And I think Kay, you were saying earlier about within an institution, just making sure everyone's on the same page and we are talking about the same thing.
Yeah, actually, HiFlex was a Canadian invention. For their country, it's largely spread and not always possible for students to come in. So it was an organizational thing and not a learning thing. It was the other way around.
Interesting.
So, as I said at the beginning, so we're looking at the question of, so what's next after hybrid? A very vast and interesting question, but interesting as well because I think we'd all agree that it's been here since before the pandemic. So how does that influence, you think, what comes of it next? Because if it was something that was just invented to deal with a pandemic, then we could possibly see that it might be at risk of you know, kind of falling by the wayside. Now things are starting to hopefully return to what they would call normal. But it was here before, so in essence, it's something that's actually developed very, very quickly. So how does that affect what happens to it now, do you think?
I think we have to learn from it. There's a lot of literature about blended, about ICT within education, about the pedagogy. There's not so much literature about space use and what it does to the practice within it. And those are the things I think must have focus in the years after this, because all the money is spent on this, let's say, technology push from the last moment, and you have to use these. There are not new budgets available for other things, only for pilots and new steps now. So that's what I think in the coming 5 years. We really have to refocus and rethink the spaces and the spaces. Then I also mean it's hybrid and physical and online. What is the space versus the working practice, the learning practice, the teaching practice in that space? At least I think that's the work that we will do for the coming years.
I think, Kay, you raised a really valid point earlier about when to invest. And, you know, I think it's beholden on us as software vendors and others to ensure that things do integrate and can integrate, because we're in this era now where things are going to move faster, whether we like it or not, they're going to move and evolve faster. But the trust that we have to build into that relationship with our customers is that the point of investment doesn't define the point of exit. So that you're actually proving that technology adoption is a journey and it's an evolution. And I think all the vendors have proved to some extent that we can do that. But it's almost a trust thing that if you decide to dive in, that we're not going to suddenly pull the rug from under you in 3 years' time. I call it the cul-de-sac of trust, that you'll only go down one dead end and you'll never come out of it.
And I think that's very interesting. I think that the more I'm in the role I'm in, the more I learn about system architecture and how important it is to have a stable system architecture where your tools do integrate with each other, and that you're not constantly having to relearn something new that doesn't talk to anything else that you've got. So that integration is really, really important. I think where do I see hybrid actually continuing? Yes, but I think that under those very specific types of designed experiences that I think I described earlier. I think what could come through more is micro-credentials. So there are a lot of providers starting to think about a global university, how we pull 20 credits from the University of Sydney and match that with another 20 credits from the University of East Anglia, and opening up a global world of higher education. So I think that's exciting. I don't know how it would work from a quality exam or an awarding structure, but I kind of see that as the future more than I see hybrid as the future.
There's another thing too. We first need the technology before an organization can adapt to it and can use it. So we are happy with this, let's say, rapid introduction of these new technologies. New is old technology, I think. But we had to rethink from out of organization for new pedagogy, but also the credits, the examination. How do you organize it? How do you support it? It's much broader, and I always say it's like an S-curve. These years we need to have before we can really change it. Technology doesn't do that. It's just in the peripherance of a university, and the university itself has to learn, and it's coming slowly into the core of this other ways of practice.
And I think branding as well. You know, like when you start to watch your TV online on your phone and you watch it when you get home on your big 60-inch TV, you know, you don't use the word, you know, hello darling, I've started to watch a hybrid program. You just watch a program, and you know, the differentiation is something that, I would like to see that go. I totally agree with you around micro-credentials. You know, the conversations that we get pulled into around creating those courses and doing it cost effectively, which you called out earlier, and I think that's spot on, is the other conversation I'm seeing a lot of at the moment.
I wonder how much we need to, in terms of what happens with hybrid afterwards, how much do we need to look at the trends that the students are setting? Because I think that, Jack, we were talking earlier about how maybe in FE it's slightly different, but in HE the student is really the customer, and some of them, you were saying that sort of the very switched on ones feel that they are the customer and really kind of use that as a way of kind of trying to get the most out of their experience. They sort of say, I'm paying for this, like, I'm the customer, I want this, I want that. So how much do you reckon we need to listen to them rather than sort of trying to, you know, look into the crystal ball and see where things are going? Do we just need to look at, like many good business models, look at what the customer wants and where they're heading and follow them?
Yeah, I think there's always an element of customer, if you want to use that term, customer feedback, isn't there? And the sort of the natural cycle of student feedback would feed into those sort of things. But I think Kay's right about putting hybrid learning, if we're going to use that term, into the right setting where it's suitable, and not trying to sort of retrofit existing courses into the hybrid world. I think it's also important to put it in the hands of people who are passionate about it and want to use it as a tool, as opposed to over the last couple of years where people sort of had to do it out of necessity and maybe they didn't really want to engage with it. So I think that's a really important consideration if it's going to be refined and developed over the next few years, which I think is its natural sort of status at this time. It should be in the hands of people who see themselves as primarily as sort of teachers, I guess, it should be part of that course design, as Kay said before, from step one.
I know, Pete, you don't really like that term, customer, when you're talking
No,
about
no, I think it's those are members of our academic community, and the skills. I think we call them digital natives. It's not a good word. I totally agree, but they have to learn to cooperate and collaborate in live and online and in hybrid way. So these are new terms, and now the technology is there. We can work on that. And it's not only for students, but especially for teachers. And in the role from teaching to coaching, etc., over the different levels of, let's say, frontal teaching to participatory to distant, ill-structured problems.
I think that's a really good point you make about the fact that we would be best serving them to give them an experience of engaging with people online in some way. Yeah. You know, that's not to say that you have to teach them a module online if it's not appropriate, but realistically, that, you know, if someone who's starting a career now, in most sectors, I imagine they will have to communicate with people online in some way. So even if that's just, you know, a series of tutorials or dissertation support or whatever it is, then I think it would be best serving them best to give them that experience.
Yeah.
We are a technical university, and the engineer cannot do it alone any longer. All the systems are complex, so you have to work together. And 10 years ago, you started to cooperate and to learning your position within a company on your first day of your job. But now you can learn it in class and work around, because you see that many more mono and disciplinary projects come in, and where they work together within the faculty or over the borders of different faculties. And these skills were not in the curriculum before. And that, I think, is a very good addition to it.
I think one of the things that we didn't touch on in terms of hybrid and discussion is a digital divide that we need to consider. So we did a study at the university where we asked our students about their experiences, and in fact it wasn't so much the hardware that was a problem for our students, it was the Wi-Fi, and the poor Wi-Fi coverage in certain parts of the country was the real limiting factor in terms of their experiences of being able to be either fully online or remote when we had students abroad, especially from China, who weren't able to travel to us. The Wi-Fi was a significant factor, less so than their hardware.
Do you mind if I expand on that for 2 seconds? A topic at the beginning of the pandemic, I heard of a university taking delivery of £1.4 million worth of devices for libraries, which stayed in boxes for 2 years. And I think that exacerbates digital divide, because I did a rough, napkin estimate that there were 768,000 devices that were sitting in libraries, student areas, that were turned off for 2 years. There's 2.7 million students, or just over at the moment. It's nearly 25% of the student population that would have had a one-to-one relationship with a device. And then the cost compared to some of the cheaper end devices would help go a long way to eradicate that digital divide and give technology to all. And it is something that we do get energised about, because the sooner we can get devices into children's hands, the sooner they can become like you say, awful term, digital native, and then have a much richer experience along the way. But I think there is this underlying thing of the connectivity that you know, does need significant investment. I think that's a perfect call out.
So I know obviously some of you have direct experience with, you know, the institutions, universities, colleges. In terms of if we do start to just maybe try and think towards what trends the students are actually setting, is there anything there that you can share in terms of you know, sort of how they reacted? I mean, I think I don't want to be too cliche, but I think it's probably quite easy to imagine that if students can just stay in bed and watch a lecture, then they're going to say that was a great experience rather than having to come to a lecture theatre. But is there anything kind of deeper than that you discovered? Has there been some real kind of honest feedback about, you know, I did like this, but I didn't like that. I need this, I don't need that you've seen?
I think it's very mixed. I think I would say trust. I think you alluded to trust in terms of, you know, investing in software. But I think we lost trust from our student population. And I think that happened for a couple of reasons. The students coming into us had already lost trust in an education system that had let them down over teacher-assessed grades. And they then came into a higher education system which was struggling to repurpose its teaching in a way that wasn't just about emergency remote delivery. So I think we need to rebuild that student trust. And we are just about to graduate a group of students who have not had a normal experience at all. And they've not experienced necessarily a lovely summer's day on the Broad having a barbecue. They couldn't do that. So I think there's a lost experience. I feel, and which is very sad. We're only just beginning to see our campuses come alive again, I think, and it's taken a long time. But I think rebuilding student trust is a big thing which we need to tackle.
You have a positive feel at the other side because as a campus you know how important you are. And that was a discussion a few years ago where they say, oh, we don't want to build new buildings because those millions we can better invest that to online, let's say, teaching practices. And I really believe that coming together for the students, the social coherence, with working together, if you are just before your exam and you see the other guys on the table working hard, you work hard as well. And those are some invisible energy sources. I cannot describe it, but what you see is that when students come together, something comes to existence. And now we know that because of this pandemic.
Yeah. I think I've been, previous to working at Shaw, I had a broader role within the AV industry, and I've been talking to people about video conferencing for 15, 16 years, and in the last 2 years we've all been forced into doing it in ways that we perhaps didn't before. But you'll never replace the face-to-face interaction, and you know, and events like this absolutely prove that point. That you know, just getting to know people and interact with people, whether it's learning or in the workplace, then yeah, it's what we need as humans.
And to add on that, to shake hands, it's so different. You make a connection directly instead of doing your elbows or boxes. It's really a difference.
Yeah.
I think it was quite funny. I had no choice this morning. I'm not going to call him out, but one of the organisers made it quite clear that he was hugging me this morning. So that was going to happen. I think
How do you do that online?
Yeah, exactly. You can't do it. You know, it was lovely talking to you earlier around the work you're doing around women in tech, and really looking forward to your session in a second. The bit that I've loved is almost raising the bar around diversity and inclusion and accessibility. And I think that flexibility that hybrid brings for people that do have a disability, and do have something that they want to work around, gives us just an opportunity to make untold amounts of progress on that arena as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that flexibility in how we learn and how we do business opens up so many more opportunities for diversity and inclusion of all types.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, yeah, I was just going to not to sort of just to piggyback on the back of that, something that's not exactly around diversity and inclusion, but just from an economic point of view as well. I mean, the part of the world that I work in it's one of the most deprived areas in the UK, and one of the things that I was just thinking when you were asking about the feedback from the students, one of the things that they really liked about the flexible model or the online model or whatever we're calling it is it gave them that flexibility to be able to work and learn a little bit more than they had done previously. Of course, if they're doing a traditional sort of on-campus model, they can still work, but they were able to just be more available for work when they were learning from home. So a lot of them liked that angle.
Yeah, and I think that's important as well to mention in terms of like the diversity and inclusion part of things. Something that I only learned fairly recently. When you think about diversity and inclusion, I think the first thing you start to think about is diversity and inclusion around race, around gender. Those are kind of the main things, or around sort of religious persuasion, whatever it might be. Financial, like economic background, is also a really important thing, and as you say, like not just in education, but all around. Sometimes often it's cheaper to be able to get on your phone and look at a live stream of something than to buy a train ticket and get down there and have a hotel and all that kind of stuff. And as you say, it opens it up to a whole bit much wider range. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant point. The economic side of it, of what we're going into with power bills and food bills and inflation and all of those uncertainties. It does give that, in a very uneven world, it does give that level playing field that learning can take place. And if someone does need to get a second job, then there's not 2 hours of travelling at either end of a lecture, and there's not the cost of that travelling, which would actually wipe out the money they were going to earn in the evening anyway. So yeah, absolutely around that piece.
So just to close off that last part, because there was one last thing that we discussed briefly, which was we were wondering what is it that's going to have an impact on how long hybrid lasts? Like what else is there out there? Do you think we've covered everything, or is there more that we can look to say, okay, this, like whether it's skills, for example, like the skills people need, in order to kind of maintain those systems, is that going to have an impact on it as well?
I think hybrid it was there before the pandemic. The pandemic forces all into adopting it faster and quicker than perhaps we might have done. And I think it will just naturally continue to evolve to suit...
Stop it.
Pete's getting a call.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I think, it will continue to evolve. Students will give their feedback. We like this, we don't like that. Lecturers and teachers will give their feedback. And nothing is ever static, which is part of the reason why I love working in this industry is...
At least the sound is off now.
It continues to evolve.
Agreed.
Technical difficulties.
I'm sorry.
So it's interesting that we would talk about skills, and obviously Jack spoke obviously on the subject of a skills gap. And it was something that we were thinking about discussing in this panel, so the skills gap in the AV industry. But it seemed like it's something that people talk about a lot, and obviously we saw on the agenda that Jack was speaking about that and sort of encouraging that. But we still explored it a little bit, and actually something that came up rather than a skills gap was an awareness gap. Karis, that's something you mentioned. So maybe we can explore that a little bit. Like, is there an awareness gap in the AV industry, and if so, how does that manifest itself, and what harm is it causing?
I think, from my personal experience, I came into this industry almost by accident, And I was recently interviewed for an article to do with International Women's Day, and of the 5 different women that were interviewed, we all came into it by accident. And so I think it's really important to make young people aware of the opportunities and the experiences that are possible. And things like what Jack's doing is fantastic. I've signed up to become a STEM ambassador to go and speak to young people at secondary school age, and apparently the prime age group to actually focus on is 9, 10, 11-year-olds, to make them understand what opportunities there are, and get them enthusiastic and interested in the subject from a young age.
Is there an awareness gap in the industry, do you think?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. As I said before, when we first started the AV course in 2018, we great response from industry, very little response from prospective students. I would go and talk to groups of people about it, and they'd go, "What? AV, what are you talking about?" I don't know. Then I'd spend a little bit of time talking about it, and then some of them joined us and some of them didn't. But I think there is a visibility problem. I'm a little bit of an outsider in AV, as you know, Ben. I have a bit of a different background, but I think more work can be done. But it's who does that. Obviously, Avixa do a lot of good work, and I'm being involved in bits of that, and STEM ambassador stuff sounds great. And I think you're absolutely right about getting to young people predominantly. But I think you also need to get to parents as well, because young people can be very sort of swayed by the parents' views on based on what they go into, whether it's high school options or FE or HE or whatever. So broader awareness is needed, and that's why I always try to encourage people such as yourselves to talk to as many people as possible about what you do, and really bring people into that. If you have, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, AV touches us, all day, every day, and more and more. You go into a supermarket and there's digital signage and increasing use of touch screens, and you go to a sports event or a theatre, and AV is all around us, but people don't actually realise that. And if you ask my sons what I do, they're 11 and 14, they think I sell TVs. Well, I do sell, or I certainly used to sell large screens, but there's so much more to it than just that.
Sorry.
Exactly. Oh, sorry.
I think that is a really important point, though. I think the strength of AV is its breadth, but also its weakness in terms of visibility is its breadth, because you can't just say that's it, because it's also all of these other things as well. And because it's so broad, it can be quite hard to conceptualise what it is for people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so many times when I'm at a party or whatever, and you're chatting to a group of people you don't really know, and you ask them, so what do you do? And they say, oh, I'm a teacher, or I'm an accountant, I'm a surveyor, and what do you do? And it's like, well, and then you really have to build them up from the bottom, and then kind of keep them interested, and usually, well.
And it's even more complex because audio, let's say music, and video, let's say television, everybody understands that, but the lighting, the acoustics, the places, the space, how it facilitates, those are things we cannot find people. For instance, the architects, when they make new buildings, they do a wonderful job, but they do not realize that education has shifted during the last 3 decades, and they still design in a frontal teaching way instead of the other ways. And what they forget, I think, is the function of the building, the function of the space instead of the outer face. And that's our hardest thing with the architects. We really have to correct them for the lighting and for especially the height for the ceiling, because the screen must be big enough to be read by the last row if you have, let's say, textual information or formulas or whatever. The old chalkboards, the teachers learned how to write the height, how large you, because they really interact dependent on the depth of the lecture hall. They wrote higher or smaller. And I've done some empirical research to that, and it comes between 17 and 23 arc minutes. That's 1/3 of a degree, and that's about the same as 100% visual acuity. So that's okay. And then the screens came in, the displays, etc., and they were under 10 arc minutes. And okay, you can recognize the words in your own language, but you cannot recognize these Greek characters in formulas. So it was really, it was wrong everywhere at our university. I looked at other universities, it was wrong there too. And I haven't seen good practices, not much. So there is a lot of more than AV. If I talk to the facility management and they give their definition of AV, then it's more about the television and the music, instead of the protocols, the architecture, which sounds, with resolutions, etc., etc. All those things together. So there is a lot to learn. There are many gaps still to bridge.
I'm going to pick up on that. I'm going to go back a couple of steps if it's okay. As I was walking up here, it was, at a personal level, it was nice to see gender diversity. We got 3 and 2. Okay, we can do better, but we're doing well. Race diversity, still a lot to do, and that comes through awareness and the campaigns. And if I look at what everyone is doing around raising awareness, then we're going to see the fruits of that soon. And hopefully we'll start to see panel discussions like this being really diverse. What kills me of an evening is looking on LinkedIn and seeing the classic panel discussion of 4 males, 5 males sitting there, and my heart sinks, thinking that we've still got so much to do on that front, and we should never give up and drive harder. The second one is the level you've just described. It comes back to what you said, Kay, around, and you as well, around awareness of what the tech does. I was with one of the universities who said anyone who's 5 rows back has been distance learning since they walked into the room, and it's good for me to learn around what we need to do to raise awareness of the small features that go above and beyond AV into collaboration. So, the ability to watch the PowerPoint on your own device while you're presenting on the big one here, so that I can apply a color filter or a text filter, so I can work with my neurodiversity differences, my accessibility differences. And that's a passion that I think we're all vested in to drive that knowledge.
I think that's interesting, because one of the things that we noticed when we came back to face-to-face teaching, that we would still stream our slides through Blackboard Collaborate, and students would still use the chat. So we would have a separate device open with all of the chat, and they were much, much more comfortable in asking a whole range of really interesting questions virtually through the chat in the room than they were putting up their hands and asking that particular question. So that whole barrier of interaction has really, really come down, that's been a fascinating outcome.
Yeah, great.
Wonderful. Well, we've only got about 10 minutes left of our slot, so I'd like to open up some questions now, please. So if we can locate the catch box. Oh, no, there it is. It's coming up behind you. Okay.
Thank you. I have a question about expectations. You're right, hybrid teaching will continue, maybe for the odd courses here and there where we need it, and I've been enabling hybrid teaching for 15, 20 years without knowing it was called that. But how do we manage the expectations of the staff and the academic students? At the start of 2020, our students were quite happy just to be able to watch the lecture recordings from last year, just to have something to finish off that year's course. By the end of 2020, they expected to be taught live online. By the following year, they expected the quality of that to be as good as a YouTube creator or television. by the end of this year and expect it to be as good as watching mainstream television. The quality, the expectation of the quality will continue to rise. What should we do? How do we manage the expectations of what we can and can't do?
I think that's such an interesting thing, because I kind of think that what you offer as and package as a fully online degree is different to perhaps the content that you would use for a degree which is primarily face-to-face. I think the quality is the content is just as good. I think it's the quality of production that is less in typically when we are home producing it in our offices or at home. But I think that providing the students achieve their learning outcomes, and I think that's the real key thing here. You can achieve a learning outcome from something which doesn't look perhaps particularly fantastic, in the same way as you can achieve a learning outcome from something that looks beautiful and is being produced wonderfully. Still the same learning outcome.
I think personally, I think it's play to the advantages of the experience. As you say, it's not going to look like your favourite YouTube creator shot in 4K and kind of edited, however, and kind of packaged up and done like that, because that's not really the point. It's not really kind of the goal either. But look at the opportunities that you have in that sense. Like if you were in a room, in a lecture theatre with 200 people, would you feel confident putting up your hand and asking a question, no matter what the question is, whether it's a very soft question or if it's quite a controversial question? How does that compare to how if you could send it in on a chat function while you're sitting in front of your laptop, and the lecturer would read it out and give it the same amount of recognition as if it had been in a lecture theatre, but you didn't have to stick your hand up and have that 15 seconds of, sort of like palpitation and play to the advantages of the experience, and that's how you manage the expectation, because it's never going to look like glorious 4K, I think.
You're right, though. I think in the open days, when one university is showing off the kind of quality that's probably being produced here with a team of people at the back here and cameras and so on, that kind of quality is being shown off on one university's open day, and the other university just showing some people sat in their front rooms teaching. Students are going to head towards the one that's showing off the better production quality. So how do you manage that expectation?
Will they be able to keep it up then?
Yes, because there's the added expense. I think one of the other really thing that came out of the pandemic and teaching from home was how much the students liked our pets. And it humanised people in a way that hadn't done before. Their lecturers became real people who had other lives, who had pets and children, and I think that was interesting, and I don't think they really minded. They had an experience. It wasn't the one they had expected or paid for, but they did have that experience. I think it's very different. Again, I think if you are buying an online degree, you would expect a level of quality production, and I think that is absolutely right and valid. But if the majority of your learning is face-to-face, perhaps you're a STEM student, you're in a biology lab, you're working with me, we're doing some molecular biology, their expectations are different. Their expectations are around the equipment that they're using in the laboratory and the techniques and that they're learning there. They're not so much worried that I've created some content for them which is done in my home office, because that's not what they are. That's not what they've come to the university for. That beautiful production. They've come to the university to gain their learning outcomes through working with people in a lab or in the field or in the media studio, or in all of those other variety of ways that students learn.
I think there's a pivot as well. That's you know, I love that point that you've just raised, that we've built this concept that online should be cheaper, you know, because it's online. And I think I'm going to come back to your point in 30 seconds because it's really valid. I'll answer it at the end. But there is no reason why we can't shift the cost model where online is actually more expensive if it is things like labs, because you can build a chemistry lab online, you can build virtual machines online. The infrastructure costs, but if the benefit is that I can be in a country so that I don't have to stay away from home 7,000 miles away, then why shouldn't that carry a premium? So maybe just to cut that point off, we open up new costing models. To answer your question directly, the bar's going to get raised. You know, and it's a bit of a wake-up call that I think the exit point of the pandemic is that it's been a wake-up call. And, you know, I've seen the amazing productions and they can be done incredibly cost-effectively. Coming back to the conversation we were having a few minutes ago, it's a skills question and we're all custodians of executing on that.
And it's more to it, I think, because we talked about a customer or a member of the academics, let's say, surroundings. If they are a member, then they fit with you. The expectations would be different than if they are just a client or a customer. They want the best for the cheapest price. That's totally different. And, so I'm against the customer fault.
Can they be both?
Sorry?
Can they be both? Can they be a member of the academic community and a customer?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think there is a lot that we can do to improve the quality of our created content. I think there is more that we can do there. But I think that there's a huge amount of competing time and other priorities that happen in the HE environment.
Yeah.
So if we are going to improve the quality, there's got to be really good, you've got to have a reason to do so, and then the barrier to doing it has got to be sufficiently low so that the academic members of staff will create better quality content, and that's through, you know, work that Matt is doing, you know, thinking about little recording pods that can give you nice backgrounds, that you think about the lighting, that you think about all those other things as well. But yes, the bar is being raised. That is for sure.
I think you make
an additional. Marcus has raised.
Sorry, Kate, just while that's being thrown, Kate, I think you make a good point about something else is got to give, doesn't it? If you put a lot of time and effort into high quality production, something's got to give. And sorry, I know you don't like the customer terminology, but if we stick with that just for a second, with regard to expectations, well, it depends what you sell them. Yes. You know, if you for want of a better expression, if you sell them a traditional learning and teaching model, then they're not going to expect high quality production. If you sell them high quality production, that's what they're going to expect.
Yeah.
My question is kind of to the whole panel, really. It's but also because Ian's touched on some points around perhaps how some of the product that sits within campuses predominantly has changed over the last couple of years and is likely to change, looking at some of the sort of features that you were talking about that are waiting in the wings. And so this is really a question about sort of pace of change and how that impacts universities. Because we talked earlier about digital spaces just being learning and teaching spaces and an extension of all of there are different modes, but there are just these places that learning and teaching occurs. And arguably the cloud was the place, the digital space of learning that changed fastest over the last couple of years and influenced what we do in all of our collective disciplines. So given that that's unlikely to decelerate, it's likely to accelerate, how do universities respond to that? Because we're slow places, but we've got this amazing force of change that's happening in cloud infrastructure that impacts our learning and teaching space.
We've got 2.5 minutes to answer that question. Make it quick.
I think I can say that we can be really slow to change digital It takes a while to go through a procurement process. It takes a while to get it security, data protection, single sign-on. It's a long, slow process. So being agile in the technology sector is something that I'm constantly trying to encourage us to be, but always come up against certain barriers.
I mean, I think you've got Echo and you've got, teams in your spaces that are already procured and already actively used, but they're just rapidly evolving.
They do.
And it's how we collectively respond to that, I think, that is going to be a key challenge for us all.
And so I think that the products such as Microsoft, which offer a range of things on one license, is easier, because you can switch something on or allow something to be rolled out at an institution. You're not having to go back through a massive procurement process in order to do it. So that is a big advantage to being agile, but at the same time, you want the right tool for the right workflow. And again, that's another argument as well.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, because we are out of time. But yeah, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you here for participating and for the great questions. I wish we could have had time for more. But I believe we're heading for a networking reception of sorts now. So please, I encourage you all to continue those conversations and those questions. And look forward to seeing you over there. But yeah, thank you very much again to the panel and to all of you.
Thanks again, Ben and panel, and everyone who's contributed this afternoon to the presentations, and to yourselves. Very quick thanks to our in-house tech team today, who've been running the audio-visual within the facility, and also our live stream. James, David, Liam and Matt. So huge thanks to you. Mick Gibbons, I've got your raffle card. There you go, there you are, mate. Right. Fab. So we're going to have beers back over in Congregation Hall, courtesy of Hugh Shot. Matt, you just give us a brief update on what the rest of the day is going to look like.
Yeah, sure, of course. So we're going to move back over to Congregation Hall now, where we're going to have the famous Hugh Shot reception drinks. The exhibition hall will still be open, so you can still peruse and chat with the sponsors. But around 5 o'clock, we are going to close the hall and make our way to the coaches, and then on to the hotels, and ready for the evening event and the conference dinner this evening.
And we're walking over to Norwich City, aren't we?
We are indeed. Yeah, there was a bit of confusion. We heard from somebody that there was a bit of a longer walk than they originally thought, but from Duke Street it's about a 23-minute walk. So I'm in the Duke Street Hotel. We'll meet down in the foyer around 6:30, and we'll head off there.
And Nelson is about 15-minute walk.
Correct. Yeah. So I think we can leave Nelson a bit later, about 6:45.
So I think it's 7 p.m. drinks at Norwich City.
Correct. 7 p.m. drinks, ready to sit down for the dinner at 7:45.
Lovely job. So over back to Congregation Hall now, and let's have a beer. Cheers.